The habitability of a planet, i.e. its capacity to host living organisms, is subject to the presence of liquid water. As far as we know, Earth is the only planet in the solar system that meets this requirement. Even then, more than 4 billion years ago, an immense ocean covered the Earth. But how did so much water end up on our planet? A little earlier, around 4.6 billion years ago, in a distant region of the Milky Way, a vast disk of matter was formed. The gases, lumps, and grains that make up this disk concentrate to form the Sun, our star. The remaining matter coalesces to form planets and smaller objects, such as dwarf planets and asteroids. Proto-Earth is born at this point. Its atmosphere contains a lot of hydrogen, the main constituent of the protosolar disk. Some 50 million years later, Proto-Earth was hit by a massive object, a Mars-sized planetoid named Theia. The result was the Moon. Under the force of the impact, the light elements of the Earth's atmosphere are thrown off. A new atmosphere is created. It is rich in carbon dioxide, nitrogen, and water vapor. Although very hot, the Earth cools quickly. The water vapor condenses and falls as rain, a continuous torrential downpour that forms the first single immense ocean. The Earth's mantle solidifies, forming a first crust beneath the ocean. Plate tectonics begin. A few volcanoes rise above the water level like islands. They are far more active than our present-day volcanoes. The Earth is still full of energy, compensating for the weakness of the Sun, still young and less powerful than today. If it hadn't released so much energy, and if the carbon dioxide in the atmosphere hadn't been so present, causing a major greenhouse effect, the water would have frozen. But it did remain liquid. This was followed by a long period during which our planet was hit by numerous asteroids. This event is known as the Great Lake Bombardment. It is likely that these impacts contributed to bringing additional water and even organic molecules to our planet. Then, over 3.8 billion years ago, these cataclysmic bombardments came to an end. It was at this point, or even a little earlier, over 4 billion years according to some scientific scenarios, that life appeared in its most primitive form. At that time, the Earth was made up of an immense ocean, highly active volcanoes, and small pieces of continent. The Moon was moving away from it, but had not yet reached its current orbit. It's 3 times closer. The tidal force is therefore immense, more than 20 times greater than today's tidal force. Added to this are violent winds. The ocean is warmer than today, but already contains sodium and chlorides. The ocean is already salty. Organic molecules are also present. Compared with our modern oceans, it also contains dissolved ferrous iron. All these elements present in the primordial ocean react to form longer molecules known as sugars. To build a living cell, we need proteins and nucleic acids as well as sugars. the basic building blocks of polymers, proteins, are easily synthesized, even in the primordial ocean. As for nucleic acids, the synthesis of their precursors is a little more complex. While the source of phosphorus in primitive oceans remains a mystery, that of sulfur certainly comes from active volcanoes or hydrothermal springs in the form of hydrogen sulfide. The late Great Bombardment may have brought some of these molecules with it via the many asteroids that struck the Earth. Darwin likened the primitive ocean to a warm little pond. According to Darwin, the molecules were sufficiently concentrated for chemistry to take hold, synthesizing a fairly long chain of amino acids. Then came the transition from chemistry to biology. At the bottom of the oceans, near hydrothermal springs, simple substances coalesce into increasingly complex molecules. These give rise to the first organism, in the form of a tiny primitive cell. It is thanks to this cell that the astonishing story of life begins. The first organisms to develop on Earth in abundance were bacteria. They live exclusively in the oceans. These organisms colonize warm environments such as the edges of hydrothermal springs or other extreme environments. They assimilate mineral matter by chemical reaction without the need for light or oxygen, and were able to survive in astonishing conditions. Whether it's near very hot water, up to 100 degrees Celsius or 212 degrees Fahrenheit, commonly found around hot water geysers or deep within oceanic faults when plumes of burning, sulfurous mud emerge from the bowels of the Earth. Other bacteria, on the other hand, like temperatures close to the freezing point, and even thrive under the ice in frozen deserts, where the average temperature can drop below minus 68 degrees Celsius or minus 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Organisms can even be found in acid solutions or hyper-salty waters. Little by little, other families of bacteria are appearing, such as cyanobacteria. Their main characteristic is the presence of pigments that enable them to capture and transform light energy. The most extraordinary pigment in terms of its complexity and role is chlorophyll. This molecule transforms the sun's energy to assimilate mineral matter. This photosynthesis reaction releases oxygen, which dissolves in water. This is how the first plant bacteria began to oxygenate the water in which they lived. They left their mark on Earth in the form of the fossil formations known as stromatolites. At that time, oxygen was harmful. A veritable planetary upheaval was about to take place. Over several 100 million years, the liquid environment of life evolved and became loaded with oxygen. All bacteria sensitive to this gas died out. Some, which may have been sensitive to the corrosive action of oxygen, gradually adapt until they eventually use it. This change radically alters the animal kingdom. New forms of life appeared, such as eukaryotes, and over hundreds of millions of years, the fauna became more complex. Cells began to cluster together, whereas until then they had remained isolated, and the first multicellular animals appeared. The sponge is the oldest known animal. It is thought to have appeared over 890 million years ago. These primitive animals had no nervous, vascular, or digestive systems. Over several million years, these primitive animals evolved into the first, more complex animals during the Ediacaran period 600 million years ago. While living organisms were mostly simple, made up of individual cells, or sometimes grouped together in colonies, a veritable zoological Big Bang occurred during the Cambrian, between 541 and 530 million years ago. This explosion of organisms led to the sudden appearance of most of today's major phyla of multicellular animals. This event initiated a gigantic diversification of animal, plant, and bacterial classes and species. The Earth consists of a single continent, Rodinia, surrounded by an immense ocean called Morovia. But this supercontinent is beginning to break up, and new pieces of continent are appearing. The largest of these will occupy most of the southern hemisphere, Proto-Gondwana. To the north, the other pieces form a large archipelago, with Laurentia, Baltica, and Siberia. The planetary climate is warm, around 25 degrees Celsius or 77 degrees Fahrenheit. In the center of Laurentia, Baltica, and Siberia, an ocean called Iapetus forms. In its shallows, animal life explodes. Most were soft-bodied animals such as worms and sponges, but there were also the first arthropods, distant ancestors of today's insects and crustaceans, ancestors of future cephalopods, as well as animals that had no descendants. They all evolved on the ocean floor. This new fauna now possesses internal and external organs such as eyes, legs, digestive system, antennae, mouth apparatus. A food chain now exists. Microorganisms such as trilobites form the bottom of this chain, and at the very top is a super predator, Animalocaris. Animalocaris is a genus of arthropods and the first known predator in the history of life. Its distinctive feature is its large, complete visual organs, compound eyes. 2 to 3 centimeters or 1 inch long, they have 16,000 facets. Its eyesight, though primitive, enables it to distinguish potential prey, which is already a formidable evolutionary asset. Its long, narrow body measures less than a meter. It is covered by a mineral-free exoskeleton and possesses a toothy mouth, flexible legs, and a long V-shaped tail, which must have enabled it to propel itself swiftly through the water. Its 28 lateral fins are arranged in pairs. Alongside him are many other animals, each more original than the last. Less spectacular in terms of size, Hallucinogea sparsa has a long, slender, worm-like body, measuring up to 3 centimeters or 1 inch. A predatory ancestor of cephalopods, Nectocaris pteryx, is described as having a head with 2 eyes, 1 or 2 pairs of appendages, and an oval carapace at the rear. But the specimen that really catches our attention is the famous pangea, a species of worm or eel just a few centimeters long. Its protodorsal spine suggests that it was the first animal of the chordate phylum, or even the precursor of the vertebrate branch. Today, however, there is no unanimity on this last point. This animal has a chord, a primitive spinal column running the length of the animal. It is from this chord that the muscles and organs that make up the animal are assembled. In the space of a few million years, all the pieces needed for the great adventure of the evolution of the animal world were in place. This Cambrian explosion was halted at the end of the period by an extinction caused by glaciation and a sudden change in temperature. Nearly 40% of species became extinct. Although ecological niches were left vacant, they were rapidly taken over by surviving species during the Ordovician period, leading to evolutionary radiation. Glaciation lowered sea levels and increased the number of shoals. The surviving species multiply, and although the ocean is calmer, it soon becomes populated by animals of all kinds. The families and genera of marine organisms multiply. This is the event of the Great Ordovician biodiversification. The rapid diversification of plankton favored the development of marine fauna living on the ocean floor. Crinoids, bivalve brachiopods, and trilobites multiply, but new arrivals also develop. Corals colonize the oceans and build coral reefs. They enrich the marine fauna. Land seems lifeless, and yet, on closer inspection, a few lichens are beginning to set their sights on it. A lichen is a fungus associated with an algae that grows where no plant can live. The fungus and the algae live in a symbiotic relationship, rather like coral. The fungus protects the algae. It protects it with water and mineral salts. The algae produces sugars and other products that it shares with the fungus. They can be found on rocks by the sea or on cooled lava. At first sight, nothing very extraordinary, and yet, when they rot, lichens leave debris that forms a soil rich enough for moss and other plants to grow. The ground is slowly prepared. The tiny advance of life on Earth is about to be halted by a mass extinction. Glaciation sets in, wiping out many species and slowing down the momentum that some life forms were beginning to build up out of the water. The ocean, once teeming with life, is now calm. Many families, genera, and species of animals and plants have disappeared. There's a kind of void, but nature hastened to fill it, and the surviving species underwent an evolutionary radiation. The continents continue to move. Siberia, Baltica, and Laurentia, which had formed a mega archipelago, moved closer to Proto-Gondwana. Over time, they formed the supercontinent Laurasia. The collision of these lands gave rise to a gigantic mountain range, the Caledonian Chain. Then the ice began to melt. Ocean levels rise, and certain species develop considerably. With the ice cap gone, the climate becomes mild again, with temperatures around 20 degrees Celsius or 68 degrees Fahrenheit. What about the mainland? We find the lichens that were already starting to appear before the extinction. The first mosses are now appearing, and the flora will begin to establish itself out of the water. While life abounded in the depths of the sea, the landscape on land at the time consisted of bare, windswept rock as far as the eye could see. Then, as they pass, high and low tides leave sediments at the water's edge. This sediment is the first holdfast for plant life. The oldest known trace of primitive plants is that of Cooksonia. High and low tides and the consequent alternation between the passage of water and the drying out of the water allow the flora to gradually become accustomed to life outside the water. Cooksonia plants grow to less than 10 centimeters in height and have a relatively simple structure. They have no leaves or flowers, only a stem that divides into several branches. Each branch ends in a rounded sporangium containing the spores. A priori, it has no roots and is attached to the ground by radicals, fine, superficially concentrated roots. Cooksonia plants release their spores into the air to reproduce. Cooksonia and the other primitive plants are confronted with the phenomenon of gravity, a physics that is new to them. They evolved by developing a hydraulic internal skeleton and a protective layer of wax. They are better able to support their own weight and cope with drought. The cuticle prevents the plant's water from evaporating, but it also forms a layer impermeable to carbon dioxide and oxygen. Over time, plants will develop tiny openings called stomata, enabling them to breathe through the air. Some have cells to distribute water and nutrients to higher organs, but at the time of the first plants, the soil was poor in nutrients. So plants develop rhizomes, like roots, to draw the food they need from the ground. Even though the soil was still almost non-existent, plants themselves helped to build it by breaking down the rocks on which they ventured. A little later, they develop outgrowths to increase the surface area exposed to solar energy. All these primitive plants must also find a way to reproduce. They cannot, like marine plants, discharge their gametes into the water. They must now find an aerial means of reproduction. This is done via spores. These are spread by the wind, and as they germinate, produce male or female organs, which in turn release their sex cells into the moist soil. The higher the plant, the more efficient the spore dispersal. This is why some plants try to grow taller, which also gives them the advantage of capturing even more of the sun's energy than their ground-level counterparts. Now, they need to give their stems more strength to support their weight and height. To this end, they add a woody support tissue. They can grow taller and taller and develop an ever-increasing diameter. Plants reach ever greater heights, with trunks measuring at least 10 centimeters or 4 inches in diameter. This may seem ridiculous compared with our present-day forests, but this primitive vegetation has nonetheless allowed other visitors to venture onto dry land. A few critters docked and ventured out onto the newly forming vegetation. But who are these curious little creatures? Probably earthworms, as life teems in the mud, or even mites. But the first real fossilized traces discovered are those of an extinct species of arthropod. The ebb and flow of the sea washes all kinds of organic waste and corpses onto the shore. This highly attractive food is a great incentive for carnivorous organisms to leave the waters. What's more, the desert is slowly becoming clothed in mosses, lichens, and other primitive plants, a tempting exploration ground for certain organisms. Curious, tiny, and discreet inhabitants shelter between grains of earth and roots beneath a layer of decomposing vegetation on which they feed. Primitive insects swarm in the midst of this growing vegetation. At first, the largest are no bigger than a few millimeters. They look like springtails, the pan-crustaceous jumping arthropods that populate our land today. Some are carnivores, feeding on the corpses of other animals, and others feed on plants, but none seem to attack them until they have rotted. Living plants certainly contain toxins they couldn't survive. It is these little beasts, so insignificant at first sight, that will eventually populate the whole Earth. Today, there are over 1.3 million known species of insect. They occupy almost every ecological niche. But this dominance didn't happen overnight. Although insects diversified very early on, in the Carboniferous period, they were initially present in small numbers. Campacaris obanensis belongs to the myriapod genus, closely related to millipedes. Its fossil was discovered in Scotland. Its legs have not been preserved. The animal measures approximately 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch in length. Its body is segmented. It evolved in an environment close to bodies of water, and certainly fed on decomposing plants. Although not their ancestor, they bear a striking resemblance to today's millipedes. Its body is covered by a carapace that is synthesized by its glands. Cooksonia fossils have been found in the same region. Strudiella devonica is a species of fossil arthropod. It is one of the oldest terrestrial insects found, and the only complete fossil insect. This small insect, measuring around 8 millimeters in length, appears to be a close relative of the early grasshoppers. It has a relatively large head, with robust mandibles and long antennae. This specimen is wingless, which prevents scientists from knowing whether it is a larva or an adult. Strudiella devonica has all the morphological features and organs required for terrestrial life. Its unspecialized mouth parts indicate that it had an omnivorous diet. The fossil shows 6 body segments, 6 legs, and 2 antennae. The genitalia have not been preserved. The first arthropods to set foot on Earth were faced with a number of difficulties. They needed a structure strong enough to support them, as well as arrangements to protect them from ultraviolet light and desiccation. They also needed to find food. Surprisingly, most arthropods are carnivores, and few are herbivores. And to satisfy carnivores, prey must be available. Dry land is still relatively devoid of life, and the first arthropods may have had to make do with fungi, molds, or rotting leaves. The first plants were therefore not a source of food, but they helped to shape the first ecosystems that gradually spread across the land. At the same time, as life was gaining ground on land, it was demonstrating real innovation in marine organisms. The Devonian is reputed to be the period known as the Age of Fish. Numerous gigantic armored fish, known as placoderms, crisscrossed the oceans, including Bothriolepis, Silurians, and Dunkleosteus. While life on land is represented only by small organisms, life in the oceans is luxuriant. Its evolution was not unrelated to the emergence from the sea. Placoderms are the vertebrates that dominate the marine world. They are highly diversified, frequenting both reefs and the open sea. They feed on algae, mollusks, and other fish. They owe their name placoderm to the plates that cover their skin. Their head and thorax are covered by a thick bony armor that protects vital organs such as the eyes, brain, and heart from predators. Their enormous jaws, made of bone with sharp edges, are like pincers that can cut their prey in two. Although placoderms were the first to be equipped with jaws, they still lack teeth. Around 400 million years ago, the group of jawed fish diversified into two major groups. On the one hand, cartilaginous fish, from which sharks, rays, and other chimeras evolved, and on the other, bony fish. Subsequently, bony fish are divided into two groups. Bony fish, known as actinopterygians, have fins with keratin rays, the protein that makes up hair, nails, and horns. The rays are shaped like arms that support the fin fan. Alongside them, bony fish with fleshy or lobed fins are called sarcopterygians. Their fins are characterized by bones that form an articulated internal skeleton. The ventral fin bones are identical in number and position to those of the tetrapod extremities. This new form of fin is now articulated around a single element, the other rays having disappeared. It's not yet a leg, but it sure looks like one. The fin ends in a soft veil of scales. Panderichthys is an extinct genus of sarcopterygians that is considered an anatomically transitional form in the evolution from fish to tetrapod. The internal skeleton of the pectoral and pelvic fins is reminiscent of Chiridian limbs. The best-known species is Panderichthys rhombolepis, which resembles a modern-day catfish. It measures between 90 and 130 centimeters or 50 inches. It has primitive lungs. This species marks an important stage in the adaptation to terrestrial locomotion, since its fleshy pectoral fins are prototypes of tetrapod limbs. This suggests that the transition to tetrapod locomotion, which relies on hind limb propulsion, went through a stage of forelimb support accompanied by body undulation. In fact, the pelvic fins of Panderichthys rhombolepis are primitive and do not allow it to take support. A few million years later, the veil at the end of the fin would evolve into a revolutionary structure in living organisms: fingers. Meanwhile, vegetation continued to grow. Primitive plants have grown so much that they can now be called trees. It took a good 50 million years for the first giant ferns, calamites, and lepidodendrons to reach heights of over 30 meters or 100 feet. At this size, the trunk is reinforced with wood and bark, like that of today's trees. The arborescent form appeared independently in different plant groups. Archaeopteris is like a fern with a coniferous trunk. It thrives in well-drained areas where it can develop its extensive root system. It contributes to the formation of deep soils. It can reach heights of up to 40 meters or 130 feet. and measure up to 1.5 meters or 5 feet in diameter. Its wood is similar to that of conifers, with tracheids and rays. Many scientists have studied the anatomy of its trunk, making it the first modern tree. The wood of Archaeopteris becomes both a conductive tissue and a support element, an ideal combination for seeking light at height. Watieza is a close relative of modern ferns and horsetails. It is one of the components of the oldest forests and is considered the oldest arborescent plant. Its general appearance is reminiscent of modern palm trees or tree ferns. It can reach heights of up to 8 meters. Instead of leaves, Watieza has fronds located in the crown in a vertical position and positioned helically on the trunk. In some plants, fronds play the role of leaves. They are often large and divided into segments. As it grows, Watieza loses its fronds, leaving scars on the surface tissue of the stem. The trunk is rather thin, with grooves in the area around the crown, the scars of the lost fronds. This tall plant remains upright thanks to its inverted conical morphology and the large number of small roots that penetrate perpendicularly into the soil. One representative of the first forests is the Gilboa petrified forest in the United States. This forest was discovered during the excavation of a quarry to build the Gilboa Dam. Hundreds of large fossilized stumps preserved in the rock were identified. It would take several years of study and research to understand this forest a little better. The bases of the trees making up the forest are bowl-shaped, and their diameter can reach up to 2 meters or 7 feet. Thousands of roots surround them. According to estimates, the tree could reach up to 10 meters or 33 feet in height, and resemble palm trees or tree ferns. Horizontal woody stems, measuring around 15 centimeters or 6 inches in diameter, were also discovered. These are creeping trunks of a neurophytalian progymnosperm, previously known only for their upright branches. A large specimen of lycopod was also discovered. This herbaceous plant has axes covered with small, narrow, microphyllous leaves. Fertile leaves have 5 segments, like vegetative leaves, and sporangia are inserted on the upper surface of each. This primitive forest already displays extraordinary complexity. The Tiktaalik roseae is the only known species of Tiktaalik, which literally means great fish of the low waters. The Tiktaalik has all the characteristics of a fish. It has scales and gills, but its triangular, flattened head and unusually shaped fins stand out. In fact, in addition to the fine ray-shaped bones that all fish have for paddling, the fins have much stronger internal bones, enabling the animal to wedge itself in shallow water using its limbs for support. This is what most four-legged animals do. This particular fin makes Tiktaalik a transitional species between fishes and Pandarictus, and the future first tetrapods, Acanthostega and Ichthyostega. The fins of Tiktaalik roseae have wrist bones and simple finger-like rays. It has gills but also primitive lungs. This enables it to establish itself in shallow waters and on land. Its scales are diamond-shaped, Its teeth are structured in 2 rows, and it has internal and external nostrils. Most fish have bony plates in the gill area, limiting head movement. Tiktaalik roseae has none. This makes it the first known fish to have a neck and pectoral girdle separate from the skull. This gives it greater freedom to hunt prey, whether in the water or on land. The rays of Tiktaalik roseae's pectoral fins, those that evolved to form the front legs of tetrapods, have become more robust, and an asymmetry has developed between the rays on the ventral and dorsal sides. The latter become wider and more numerous than the former. This characteristic has resulted in a fleshy, palm-like part that the animal can use to hold itself up on the ground or in rivers. This suggests the presence of muscles under the fins to support the animal's weight when pulling itself up in the open air. Another visible evolution on the animal is that its eyes and nostrils are positioned above the head. As brackish waters are low in oxygen, it is forced to breathe at the surface. This feature enables it to breathe without taking its head out of the water, like today's crocodiles. Tiktaalik roseae is somewhere between a fish and a tetrapod. Its anatomical characteristics make it an intermediate species. Acanthostega and Ichthyostega were among the first tetrapods, defined as legged fish. They were aquatic animals with gills, but their 8-toed legs enabled them to navigate muddy, cluttered environments out of the water. Acanthostega is considered one of the first terrestrial vertebrates. It has chiridial limbs, articulated locomotor appendages equipped with fingers, an anatomical feature of the first tetrapods. Acanthostega measures around 60 centimeters in length. On each of its hands it has 8 fingers linked by a tendinous sheath. It has no wrists but a shoulder and a forelimb similar to those of a fish. However, the shoulder and forelimb cannot be bent forward or at the elbow, and cannot be used for standing or walking. He therefore had to use them for paddling or clinging to vegetation. Its pelvic girdle becomes a load-bearing structure, enabling it to counteract the force of gravity when it is no longer in the water. Although Acanthostega has lungs, its ribs are too short to support the rib cage outside an aquatic environment. Many scientists agree that Acanthostega would never have lived outside the sea and would have been primarily an aquatic animal. It must have come ashore to find food. Its jaw shows a difference from that of fish, which would have enabled it to feed on food either out of the water or on land. Alongside Acanthostega, Ichthyostega is one of the oldest known four-limbed vertebrates. Ichthyostega is a rather large animal for its time, measuring around 1.5 meters or 5 feet in length. Its eyes are set on top of a flattened skull, and it has large teeth. Its limbs are long, with 7 toes on each end of the hind limbs. The morphology of its shoulder and pelvic girdles is more robust and better adapted to terrestrial life than that of Acanthostega. Its vertebrae are also stronger. How did the fingers get added to the limb tips of these early tetrapods? Were the fingers pre-existing elements, or did they transform and evolve over time? The latest research suggests that the fingers originated from abnormal growth of the fin tips. In the fish embryo, the fin tips form the apical ridge through which the bony rays of the fin are formed. Once all the rays have formed, the ridge peels off, stopping the construction of new bony structures on the fin. The fin then forms a veil and completes its development. The anomaly that led to the development of the fingers would have been that the apical ridge failed to detach. After forming the bones of the arm, forearm, and wrist, it then went on to build the phalanges. With their fingers, Acanthostega and Ichthyostega were able to survey muddy deltas dotted with plants and tree branches. They were able to spread branches and wade through mud, as well as move from one arm of a river to the other. Their life remained essentially aquatic. Their legs are still not very functional, as the absence of joints makes them very rigid. As they have no ankles, they are unable to extend themselves. These protopatties are therefore only good for carrying fish and being used as paddles for travel. Finally, at the end of the Devonian period, 360 million years ago, these legs came in very handy. Terrestrial environments became increasingly vast as ocean levels dropped. Acanthostega and Ichthyostega, along with their tetrapod congeners, are able to reach isolated bodies of water and rivers. They survived this new environment better than others. It was during the Carboniferous period that flexible ankles, wrists, and elbows gave them incredible mobility. They could now leave the water's edge and venture out to conquer the immense forests that had in the meantime colonized dry land. Soon after Acanthostega and Ichthyostega, sea scorpions and spiders reached dry land. But this conquest was halted by another massive glaciation, which led to a mass extinction. 75% of the species that existed in the Devonian disappeared. The Earth emerges from a major mass extinction, resulting in the death of many animals. At this time, the continents Laurasia and Gondwana come together to form a supercontinent called Pangea. It is surrounded by the Panthalassa Ocean. Tectonic plate movements cause sea levels to rise. Many of the plants that remain on dry land are drowned. But nature has not said its last word. Forests continue to colonize. In the midst of tree ferns and giant horsetails, a new tree has appeared, the Lepidodendron. It's one of the giant lycopods, oversized plants that have dominated the Earth for a long time. The Lepidodendron reaches heights of over 50 meters or 165 feet, with a trunk 2 meters or 7 feet in diameter. Its trunk is firmly anchored to the ground by numerous roots. It has no intermediate branches, but is topped by a crown of foliage arranged like a parasol. This is when bark and seed trees appear. Bark trees became the source of coal, which was used in abundance during the Industrial Revolution. Following fires or floods, these trees were buried and formed sediments. Deprived of air and subjected to high pressure, organic elements are transformed into carbon compounds. The emergence of seed plants was a botanical revolution and a new step in the development of life on land. Henceforth, plant reproduction was no longer dependent on water and became aerial. The elements that ensure the plant's dissemination are no longer spores, but seeds. These multicellular seeds are protected by protective envelopes formed by the lignified integuments of the ovule. They contain not only an embryo, but also the reserves such as carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins needed for its development during the early stages. The seed detaches from the plant and ensures the dissemination of the species. Their tiny size and hooks enable them to attach themselves to animals, while their appendages provide a grip on the wind, all characteristics that facilitate dispersal. Seeds also have another fundamental characteristic. Their tissues are dehydrated, allowing them to enter dormancy when conditions are unfavorable for germination. Seeds can therefore be buried in the soil for several years before germinating. Animals continue to develop and adapt to dry land. In the mid-Carboniferous, sea levels drop again. The extension of terrestrial environments isolates bodies of water. But tetrapods now have limbs that can bend, and they adapt very well to this new environment. They also have lungs, and are ready to conquer the gigantic Carboniferous forests that offer them a moist, shady environment in which to live. Amphibians were the first tetrapods. They were able to live both in water and on land. They had lungs to breathe air, but they also had to lay their eggs in water. But a new phylum appeared during the Carboniferous period, the reptiles. These were the first tetrapods to be fully adapted to life on land. They had a body covered in scales that protected them from predators and the elements. They also laid their eggs on land. Insects developed rapidly during this period. Insects have diversified very rapidly since they first appeared. By the Carboniferous, they accounted for at least 60% of biodiversity. In just a few million years, this group outnumbered their main terrestrial competitors. Their secret? A very useful feature for survival in this world of predators: wings. The group of wingless insects known as apterygotes represents just 1% of today's insects. Their congeners have largely overtaken them. The appearance of wings is difficult to date and explain. Perhaps they were gills, modified to enable aquatic organisms to fly short distances? This is just one hypothesis among many. What is certain is that thanks to their gravity-defying wings, insects were the sole masters of the air for several million years. Although flora, with the appearance of seed plants, gradually freed themselves from the aquatic environment, animals remain dependent on water for their food, and above all for their reproduction. A major innovation occurred around 310 million years ago with the appearance of the amnion. This is the envelope that allows the amniote embryo to develop in a liquid environment. Its innovative feature is that it can be laid out of the water. The embryo is thus protected from drying out and shocks. At the same time, some animals are equipped with a dry, more or less watertight skin to slow down water loss through the skin. Several groups of vertebrates, such as reptiles, birds, and mammals, were equipped with an amniotic sac. These groups of animals can now move away from the aquatic environment, as can amphibians, which remain water-dependent. The amniotic egg combined with the waterproof skin of the first reptiles enabled them to venture into continental areas previously inaccessible to them. They diversified, giving rise to numerous groups such as crocodilians, turtles, lizards, snakes, birds, and mammals. The appearance of the first flowering plants in the history of life on Earth is very difficult to date, as they are difficult to fossilize. Nonetheless, they play an essential role for the plants that bear them, attracting insects for pollen dissemination. Exceptional paleontological deposits have led to the discovery of two extremely well-preserved flowers. The first, Archifructus, resembles today's water lilies, but its anatomical organization remains unclear. The second, Montsechia, has long, narrow stems. Numerous fruits are found throughout the plant. These primitive flowering plants have little in common with the more classic flowers we know today. Since they first appeared, flowering plants have continued to diversify. Today, there are over 270,000 species in all environments, whether on land or in water. They range in size and shape from orchids to oak trees. By comparison, the fern group comprises 10,000 species, and the pine and associated species group around 750. And yet, these two groups are much older than flowering plants. The latter are therefore a true evolutionary success story. This is perhaps due to the way flowering plants reproduce, enabling them to rapidly colonize all types of environment. Fauna and flora are now well established on land. Although they will suffer disasters over the years, leading to more or less profound modifications, nothing will totally wipe them out. What are the effects of this outflow of water on the Earth? The colonization and establishment of life on the continents caused major changes to planet Earth over hundreds of millions of years. Land plants were the first to colonize the Earth outside water. Their roots contribute to soil formation. They break up rocks, facilitating the concentration of organic matter. Soils are essential for plant growth and have important geological implications, particularly with regard to erosion and land stability. Plant roots help prevent soil erosion by stabilizing the soil. Forests and meadows help to slow the flow of water. Particles transported by watercourses can thus be sedimented. This contributes to the formation of sedimentary rock. Certain living organisms, such as lichens and bacteria, promote the chemical alteration of rocks by releasing organic acids that can dissolve minerals. As a result, rocks disintegrate and soils are formed. Living organisms are mainly made up of carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, and oxygen. When they die, organic matter is decomposed by microbial activity. If this happens in an aerobic environment, all the carbon is converted into carbon dioxide, and mineralization is complete. If, on the other hand, this takes place in an anaerobic environment, mineralization stops as soon as all the oxygen initially present has been consumed. Most of the biomass undergoes total mineralization. The remaining 1% which sediments is the source of oil, natural gas, and coal. In this way, the accumulation of plant debris in rapidly sedimenting areas during the Carboniferous period created large reserves of carbon that are used today in the form of coal. The weathering of limestone can then be accelerated, leading to the formation of caves. Caves are underground voids of varying sizes. Microbial activity in the soil contributes to the production of carbon dioxide. The appearance of life and its emergence from the waters involve complex interactions between chemical elements, geological processes, and living organisms. This has had a major impact on the establishment and evolution of biogeochemical cycles. These cycles are essential to the regulation of ecosystems and the survival of life on Earth. Biogeochemical cycles are the processes by which elements or chemical compounds are transported or transformed between the major terrestrial reservoirs, the geosphere, atmosphere, and hydrosphere, in which the biosphere is found. Through a series of processes, elements move from one medium to another, returning to their original environment in an infinite recycling loop. Living organisms need a constant and regular supply of essential elements such as carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, and sulfur to ensure their survival. Elements circulate continuously from one environment to another, from one form to another. They are found in soil, atmosphere, water, and living tissue. This continuous circulation is known as the biogeochemical cycle. These cycles combine biological, chemical, and geological processes. Biological processes are defined as respiration or digestion. Chemical processes are combustion or synthesis reactions. The latter two take place over relatively short periods of time. Geological processes, on the other hand, occur over much longer timescales and are defined by erosion or sedimentation. The establishment of biogeochemical cycles on Earth is a complex process that has developed over billions of years. These cycles have evolved in response to interactions between chemical elements, geological processes, living organisms, and terrestrial, aquatic, and atmospheric environments. The colonization of land by plants and animals has had a major impact on biogeochemical cycles. Many mechanisms are involved, but let's take a look at the four most important cycles. The carbon cycle. The significant greening of continents apart from the polar and desert regions is a major change in Earth's history. This conquest of land by plants is not without consequences, as terrestrial plants are important players in the carbon cycle. Plants use carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to form their own living matter through the process of photosynthesis. In addition, their root cells breathe and release some CO2 into the soil. This creates acidic solutions in their vicinity and encourages the weathering of rocks, which in the long term traps carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The development of terrestrial vegetation also deepens soils by a few centimeters to 1 meter on average. The increase in continental vegetation has reduced the greenhouse effect and cooled the climate. In the long term, dead organic matter accumulates on the soil in the form of plant biomass, helping to form soils rich in organic carbon. This is then buried and transformed into fossil fuels, such as coal, oil, or natural gas. This transformation requires soil carbon sequestration. The nitrogen cycle. The massive arrival of plants on land has also had an impact on the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen is the most abundant gas in the atmosphere. Today's air contains 78% of it. This element is essential to the functioning of living organisms, since it is used to make proteins and produce the nitrogenous bases present in DNA. However, it cannot be directly assimilated in its initial form by most living organisms. We must therefore rely on bacteria to transform atmospheric nitrogen into a form that can be assimilated by other organisms. Through its biogeochemical cycle, nitrogen passes from one form to another. Bacteria, such as cyanobacteria and rhizobium, which live in symbiosis with plants, capture atmospheric nitrogen and transform it into ammonia, which is then used directly by plants and animals and reacts with hydrogen to form ammonium. Oxidation reactions then come into play, with some bacteria oxidizing ammonium to form nitrite, while others oxidize nitrite to form nitrate. Transported in soil or water, nitrate and ammonium are captured by plants through their roots. Nitrogen now fixed on plants is available to herbivorous animals and is passed on in the terrestrial food chain. Carnivorous animals ingest nitrogen by feeding on herbivorous animals. Nitrogen is then present in plant and animal waste. Certain fungi and bacteria decompose it and produce ammonia, which dissolves to form ammonium. Certain bacteria, known as denitrifying bacteria, convert nitrate into dinitrogen, returning it directly to the atmosphere. The phosphorus cycle. The phosphorus cycle was greatly disrupted when living organisms colonized dry land. Phosphorus is essential to life. It is a basic material in DNA, bones, shells, and teeth. The phosphorus cycle is sedimentary, meaning that it does not involve atmospheric processes, as it has virtually no gaseous components. The main source of phosphorus is the erosion of sedimentary rocks. Under the action of rain and wind, small quantities of phosphorus escape from the rocks. It is released in the form of dissolved phosphate and enters the food chain, starting with plants. The latter directly assimilate this essential element for their growth. Herbivores then feed on the plants, which are then eaten by carnivores. Phosphates are returned to the soil via animal feces and urine, as well as through the degradation of animals and plants once they have died. However, over time, some phosphorus has been leached from the soil and transported to the oceans, where it has become trapped in marine sediments. Human activities have resulted in additional phosphorus inputs. The mining of these phosphates for fertilizer production has altered the phosphorus cycle, leading to environmental disturbances such as eutrophication of watercourses. Water quality declines, affecting the ecosystem and the aquatic environment. The water cycle. The proliferation of terrestrial vegetation has influenced the water cycle by promoting evapotranspiration. This is the process by which terrestrial liquid water is returned to the atmosphere in gaseous form. This water comes from the sublimation of snow, the evaporation of free water, or water buried in the ground, and also from plant transpiration. How do plants, and trees in particular, transpire? You've probably noticed how nice and cool it is in the heart of a forest when it's hot. A tree actively cools the surrounding air, like a parasol, which simply reflects the sun's rays. A tree combines both actions. To grow, plants need nutrients and CO2, which they absorb and store through photosynthesis. Sap circulates through the tree, transferring mineral salts to the leaves for photosynthesis. Transpiration is the driving force, transporting water and nutrients to the leaves. Sap flows are regulated according to plant needs and climatic conditions. Transpiration takes place in the leaves, at the stomata, and in the lenticels on the bark of trunks and branches. Depending on environmental conditions, stomata may close to avoid excessive water loss. Nevertheless, the quantity of water released by a tree during evapotranspiration is very significant. For an oak tree, this amounts to 1,000 liters of water per day. Evapotranspiration is an essential component of the water cycle. Although it represents only a small part of the overall water cycle, it is fundamental. It transfers water from the soil and vegetation to the atmosphere. At present, urbanization, deforestation, and other practices that make soil impermeable reduce evapotranspiration and alter the water cycle by altering the infiltration of water into the soil. The consequences are flooding, reduced groundwater reserves, and changes in precipitation patterns. Life could not emerge from the water until it had a shield to protect it from the sun's ultraviolet rays. This is the ozone layer. Oxygen is present in 3 forms in the atmosphere. There are oxygen atoms, O, oxygen molecules, O2, which represent the oxygen we breathe, and ozone, O3. Ozone is a molecule made up of 3 oxygen atoms. It is a colorless gas, but has a very strong odor. Ozone is formed in a section of the atmosphere known as the stratosphere. In this region, high-energy solar photons can strike oxygen molecules and separate the 2 oxygen atoms. When a free oxygen atom comes into contact with an oxygen molecule O2, an ozone molecule is formed. Ozone is then naturally degraded in the stratosphere through a series of chemical transformations under the effect of the sun's ultraviolet rays. In an unpolluted atmosphere, ozone production and destruction exactly balance each other out. Its total concentration then remains relatively constant. Ozone naturally accumulates in the stratosphere, but is only present in abundance when there is sufficient oxygen. Scientific research estimates that the first threshold of the ozone layer was formed around 600 million years ago. This first threshold allowed an explosion of life during the Ediacaran period and later during the Cambrian. It was then present at 90% of today's ozone levels. The second threshold was reached around 400 million years ago, coinciding with the emergence of the first animals from the waters. The molecules making up living matter are photosensitive, which means they can be destroyed by certain types of radiation, such as ultraviolet light. Ozone absorbs a large proportion of ultraviolet rays, protecting living organisms from their harmful effects. When the Earth was first formed, it was covered in volcanoes, and the atmosphere consisted mainly of carbon dioxide and methane. There was no oxygen or ozone. In those days, without an ozone layer, the sun's ultraviolet rays reduced all organisms to aquatic and simple single-cell life. Around 600 million years ago, the accumulation of oxygen by cyanobacteria and other oxygen-releasing organisms enabled the atmosphere to reach a first threshold of oxygen, and thus ozone. When the first terrestrial arthropods emerged from the waters around 400 million years ago, the second threshold, equivalent to the present one, was reached. The oxygen produced by living organisms such as plants and the first forests slowly reached the upper layers of the atmosphere, where it was degraded by ultraviolet radiation, giving rise to ozone. Ozone supports the development of life when it is present in the stratosphere, above 15 kilometers or 9 miles in altitude. Ozone concentrations peak at around 25 kilometers or 15 miles above sea level. It is precisely this ozone-rich region of the atmosphere that is known as the ozone layer. Moreover, the amount of ozone present at any given point on the Earth's surface varies according to day, season, and latitude. The emergence of life forms from the water represents a quantum leap in the evolution of life on Earth. If this has been possible, it's because life on land has many advantages over life in the water, although this largely depends on the needs and preferences of the organisms in question. Terrestrial organisms have direct access to atmospheric air, which is far more abundant in oxygen than that dissolved in the aquatic environment. This facilitates air breathing. What's more, air is less dense than water. Land-dwelling organisms don't have to fight against buoyancy, allowing for a greater diversity of body shapes and structures. On land, solar energy is harnessed to a greater extent, and body temperature is more easily regulated. Its direct use for photosynthesis is an advantage over aquatic organisms, which receive limited energy from the depths. The continental surface provides a solid surface on which to move more efficiently. Exploration of different environments and hunting are easier. And living organisms can now dig burrows, build nests, and hide under natural shelters to protect themselves from predators or adverse weather conditions. Food resources such as terrestrial plants are now more accessible. The gigantic expanse of out-of-water surfaces helps to reduce competition and predation. Although we tend to think of living organisms as adults and of reproduction as the creation of a new adult that resembles the previous generation, it's important to note that every living organism is an organism in its own right throughout its entire life cycle, from fertilization of the egg to adulthood, and not just for a brief period of that cycle. Reproduction is not just one stage in an organism's life history, but its entire history. It is essential to note that only the DNA of a cell is capable of replication, and even this replication process depends on the action of specific enzymes, which are themselves derived from DNA. Consequently, the reproduction of all forms of life must be seen in the context of time. What is replicated are series of copies, which, like the individual images in a film, evolve in a precise and orderly fashion over time. A few examples highlight the considerable diversity of life cycles in living organisms. They also demonstrate that various phases of the life cycle can evolve, and that these changes are not limited to the adult stages. One such variation concerns minimum size, i.e., the size differences between gametes and asexual individuals. Invertebrates have a wide variety of life cycles, particularly those that undergo metamorphosis, a radical physical change. Butterflies, for example, go through 3 distinct stages: caterpillar, chrysalis, and adult. A notable feature of this development process is that during the transition from caterpillar to adult, most of the caterpillar's tissues break down and serve as a source of energy for the next phase of development. This starts when certain small structures called imaginal discs in the larva begin to grow into the adult. Thus, the butterfly essentially goes through 2 phases of growth and development: larva and chrysalis adult, as well as 2 smaller phases, fertilized egg and imaginal discs. This phenomenon is similar in sea urchins, where the larva, called the pluteus, has a small varicose bud that develops into the adult, while the pluteus tissue disintegrates. In both examples, the organism can be said to be living 2 life histories, one built on the remains of the other. Another example of the life cycle observed in certain invertebrates highlights the concept that the major distinctions between organisms do not always lie in the physical appearance of the adult, but rather in the variations in its overall life history. Let's take the Obelia coelenterate, a species of cnidarian, as an example. From an egg, it develops into a colonial structure called a hydroid, consisting of a series of branched, hydra-like organisms known as polyps. Some of these polyps specialize to become reproductive polyps and leave the colony as free-swimming jellyfish, carrying eggs and sperm with them. As with caterpillars and sea urchins, the life cycle of the Obelia jellyfish comprises 2 distinct phases: sedentary, branched polyps, and mobile jellyfish. In related coelenterates, the medusa form has completely disappeared, leaving only the polyp stage to ensure direct reproduction by carrying eggs and sperm. In other groups of coelenterates, the polyp stage has been eliminated, and the jellyfish directly spawns other jellyfish, without passing through a sedentary phase. There are also intermediate forms between these extremes. The importance of biological reproduction can be fully explained by natural selection, as set out in the concept of evolution, in particular through the theory of natural selection formulated by Charles Darwin. Darwin realized that for evolution to take place, it is essential that living organisms are able to reproduce, but also that the resulting copies are not all identical, i.e., that they exhibit variation. In this context, the most suitable variants would contribute most significantly to future generations in terms of the number of offspring. In order for this selection to endure through successive generations, Darwin also understood that these variations had to be transmitted from generation to generation, even if he hadn't yet elucidated the exact mechanism of heredity at the time. What's more, the degree of variation is of particular importance. In line with what is known as the compromise principle, itself influenced by natural selection, it is necessary to maintain a balance in the amount of variation. Too little generates no change, while too much obscures the benefits of a specific combination of inherited traits. Of the various mechanisms for controlling variation, all of which involve a delicate balance between different forces, the most effective is sexual reproduction, present in most plants and animals. In the course of evolution, where reproduction and variation are two fundamental characteristics not only necessary for natural selection, but also subject to it, sexual reproduction has proved perfectly suited to generating an appropriate amount of variation. It also enables the rapid integration of new combinations of traits within a population. An examination of the evolution of organisms from their single-cell beginnings in ancient times reveals a trend towards multicellularity and increasing size in plants and animals. Once cellular reproduction evolved into multicellular growth, multicellular organisms developed a mode of reproduction that could be more accurately described as reproduction throughout the life cycle. The increase in size brought with it numerous mechanical requirements, necessitating selection in favor of intense efficiency. The result has been a marked increase in the complexity of organisms. In terms of reproduction, this has led to a substantial increase in the possible variations in cellular reproduction during the evolution of the development process. The increase in size also implies an extended life cycle, with a great diversity of models at different stages of this cycle. Each phase of the life cycle is adaptive, with naturally selected characteristics enabling the organism to survive. In some cases, such as caterpillars and butterflies, distinct life cycle phases, separated by metamorphosis, have evolved, and the duration of these phases can be modified by natural selection, as seen in various coelenterate species. The efficiency of reproduction in order to contribute effectively to subsequent generations is another factor that has evolved through natural selection. For example, some organisms may produce many eggs, of which only a small proportion will survive, while others produce very few, or even a single egg, which they take care to protect throughout its development, thus considerably increasing the chances of survival. Both reproductive strategies have their respective advantages and disadvantages. Many other considerations linked to the natural history and structure of the organism, determined by natural selection, dictate which strategy is best suited to a particular species. It's essential that every species finds a balance, producing enough offspring to survive as long as overpopulation and disease don't become a problem. The number of individuals in some populations fluctuates cyclically, but generally remains within upper and lower limits. How natural selection regulates the number of individuals is a matter of great interest, involving various factors that influence the rate of reproduction. Since hereditary variation is mainly encoded by genes located on chromosomes, sexually reproducing organisms require a single cell stage in their life cycle. At this stage, the haploid gametes of each parent can fuse to form the diploid zygote. This process is also often observed in asexually reproducing organisms, but in this case, the asexual reproductive organs, such as spores, are small in size, favoring their efficient dispersal. Diversity of variation is regulated in a variety of ways, all involving a complex set of balanced factors. These factors include the mode of reproduction, whether asexual or sexual, the rate of genetic mutation, the number of chromosomes, the degree of exchange of chromosome segments, known as genetic recombination, the size of the individual, corresponding to the complexity and duration of the generation cycle, the size of the population, the level of inbreeding, and the relative proportions and position of haploidy and diploidy in the life cycle. Clearly, then, the mode of reproduction influences the degree of variation and vice versa. Together, these two elements allow natural selection to take place, and this selection, in turn, modifies the mechanisms of reproduction and variation. The various types of asexual reproduction enable organisms to reproduce quickly and efficiently, without needing a partner for fertilization. However, this also limits the genetic diversity of offspring, which can be a disadvantage in terms of adaptation to environmental change. Asexual reproduction occurs in prokaryotic microorganisms such as bacteria, as well as in some eukaryotic organisms, whether unicellular or multicellular. Animals have developed various methods of asexual reproduction. Binary fission is how prokaryotic cells and some protozoa reproduce. It's a form of asexual reproduction in which a parent cell undergoes division to give rise to two perfectly identical daughter cells, each of which has the potential to grow to the size of the original parent cell. For single-celled organisms, this is the only method used to produce new individuals. Many organisms use this primitive mode of reproduction, a notable example being bacteria. Bacterial fission involves chromosome replication, segregation, and cell division. Protozoa, another group of organisms, also use binary fission for reproduction. In the case of protozoa, the process shares similar fundamental steps with that of bacteria. However, protozoa differ from prokaryotes in the need to duplicate and divide their mitochondria. They also exhibit variations in the way their cells divide. In amoebae, for example, cytokinesis can occur in any plane, demonstrating a type of irregular binary fission. However, in the case of longitudinal fission, the example of Euglena, a common genus of flagellate green algae, is illustrative. Serratium, another protozoan, is distinguished by oblique cytokinesis. Paramecia is an example of a protozoan using a type of transverse binary fission. Budding represents a mode of asexual reproduction in which a new individual is formed from the outgrowth of a part of a cell or a region of the body, leading to a separation of the original organism into two individuals. In some species, the ability to produce buds can extend to almost any part of the body, while in many cases, this ability is restricted to specialized areas. Initially, a protrusion of cytoplasm or multiplying cells called a bud takes shape, gradually developing into an organism that is a replica of the parent. This new individual may later detach to live independently, or the buds may remain attached, forming aggregates or colonies. Budding is a phenomenon observed in a few unicellular organisms, such as certain bacteria, yeasts, and protozoa. However, it is interesting to note that several metazoan organisms, including some cnidarian species, regularly adopt budding as a method of reproduction. Fragmentation represents another form of asexual reproduction, in which a parent organism divides into fragments, each capable of developing independently into a new organism. These fragments grow and mature to form an entirely new generation, with characteristics identical to those of their parents. This mode of reproduction follows a three-stage process. The process begins with the creation of fragments, followed by their growth, and finally ends with the transformation of the fragments into mature individuals of the species. Fragmentation is a common method of reproduction in many coral colonies, both hard and soft. In addition, many sea anemones use division or fragmentation as a means of reproduction. Other examples of reproduction by animal fragmentation include starfish and planaria. Parthenogenesis most often involves the development of a new individual from an unfertilized gamete, making it a unisexual form of reproduction. It has been observed in almost all major invertebrate groups, including hemochordates, and with the exception of protochordates, and frequently occurs in alternation with bisexual reproduction, which involves the union of gametes. In some species where males are completely absent, reproduction seems to occur exclusively by parthenogenesis. Species that switch from parthenogenic to bisexual reproduction or alternate between these two modes of reproduction, often referred to as heterogeneous species, generally do so in response to variations in population density, food availability, or other environmental conditions. Among the most famous examples of parthenogenesis are rotifers. In some rotifer genera, males are totally absent, while in others they appear briefly and often seasonally in the population. Females predominate, or are the only sex present in the population for most of the year. Since no meiosis division takes place during egg maturation, these eggs are diploid, meaning they contain the full number of chromosomes. They give rise to new diploid individuals without requiring a chromosomal contribution from a male gamete. That is, diploid parthenogenesis. Even in the presence of males, spermatozoa are unable to fertilize the eggs, as the latter are already diploid. In the event of environmental stress, such as seasonal changes, some females produce eggs that undergo reduction division, creating eggs with a haploid number of chromosomes. To give rise to new females, these eggs must be fertilized by a male gamete. Once the new individual is mature, it is likely to reproduce parthenogenetically. However, in the absence of males in the population, haploid eggs can develop into haploid males, which then participate in bisexual reproduction. Haploid parthenogenesis. Eggs produced by bisexual reproduction are often referred to as winter eggs because of their thick shells, which protect the embryo in adverse environmental conditions. Summer eggs resulting from parthenogenesis have a thinner shell. As a result, bisexual reproduction takes place only occasionally to ensure the survival of the species. Nematodes, especially free-living species such as some dioecious soil nematodes, exhibit a type of parthenogenesis known as gynogenesis. In this mode of reproduction, the spermatozoa produced by the males do not fuse with the female's haploid egg, but simply activate it to initiate development. The result is the birth of haploid females. Parthenogenesis, which seems rare in annelids and mollusks, is more common in arthropods. Cladocerans, such as water fleas, have a reproductive cycle similar to that of rotifers. As long as environmental conditions remain optimal and food is abundant, females produce other females by diploid parthenogenesis. When conditions become unfavorable, males begin to appear in the population, triggering bisexual reproduction. The precise trigger for the appearance of males is not yet fully understood. Fertilized eggs, protected by a highly resistant shell, enter a dormant phase and can survive severe environmental conditions, including extreme temperatures and desiccation. Improved environmental conditions lead to the emergence of new females that reproduce by parthenogenesis. The ability to form a resting stage regulates population density. Whenever the food supply becomes insufficient due to an overpopulation of parthenogenetic females, bisexual reproduction is triggered, followed by a dormant phase. Insects offer numerous examples of parthenogenesis of varying complexity. One of the most fascinating is observed in bees. Unfertilized eggs develop into males called drones, while fertilized eggs give rise to workers, maintained in a state of non-reproduction by the secretions of the queen bee, the reproductive female. Life cycles involving transitions between parthenogenesis and bisexual reproduction are also observed in many homopteran and dipteran species, such as flies. Aphids, which are homopterans, have a seasonal cycle comprising a bisexual winter phase and a parthenogenetic summer phase. Some species carry out each phase on a different host plant, and the onset of these phases is largely influenced by factors such as temperature variations, day length, and food availability. In the midge, a variety of flies, the bisexual phase takes place in adulthood, while parthenogenesis occurs in the larvae, a phenomenon known as pedogenesis. Adult females lay fertilized eggs, from which larvae hatch, their ovaries developing, while the rest of the body remains a larval form. The ovaries of the larvae release eggs that enter the larval hemohole, where they develop while feeding on larval tissue. When they reach a sufficient stage of development, the young resulting from parthenogenesis emerge, either as larvae that continue their parthenogenetic reproduction, producing similar larvae, or as male or female larvae that mature into adults and reproduce bisexually. Sexual reproduction is a mode of reproduction in which two organisms, usually of different sexes, contribute genetically to the formation of offspring. This involves the fusion of special reproductive cells called gametes, which contain half the genetic material of each parent. Male and female gametes, such as spermatozoa in males and eggs in females, combine to form a new individual. Sexual reproduction results in great genetic variability among the offspring, as it mixes the genes of both parents. This variability is essential for the adaptation of species to environmental change, as it increases the chances of offspring survival by introducing new genetic combinations. As such, it offers advantages in terms of evolution and genetic diversity, but generally requires a greater investment of time and energy than asexual reproduction due to the formation of gametes, the search for a partner, and fertilization. Gamete union is an essential process in sexual reproduction in animals, allowing sperm and egg cells to fuse together, forming a new individual. However, the mechanisms that facilitate this union have evolved in different ways in different animal species. This diversification of gamete union mechanisms is the result of organisms adapting to the pressures of natural selection. Natural selection favors individuals with efficient reproductive mechanisms, enabling them to maximize their chances of reproduction and transmission of their genes to the next generation. The mechanisms of sperm transfer and fertilization are well studied in only a few sponge species. In these species, sperm are produced by the male reproductive organs, then expelled from the body into the water via a complex network of canals. When a sperm enters another sponge, or the one from which it originated, it is captured by a special flagellated cell called a choanocyte. The choanocyte then completely envelops the sperm, loses its flagellum structures, and moves to the internal tissues where the egg has matured. There, the choanocyte containing the sperm fuses with the egg, achieving fertilization. In freshwater coelenterate, sperm are also released into the water and transported by currents to other individuals. However, unlike the sponge mechanism, coelenterate eggs develop within the epidermis or superficial tissues and are exposed to nearby sperm in the water. Many species of marine coelenterates release both sperm and eggs into the water, where fertilization takes place. However, some jellyfish offer some protection to the eggs. After expulsion from the reproductive organs, the eggs are temporarily lodged in the epidermis beneath the organism, where fertilization and the first stages of development take place. In all flatworms, fertilization takes place internally. In species without a female duct, sperm is injected and fertilization takes place inside the tissue. However, most flatworms have a sophisticated system of male and female ducts. Typically, the male duct passes through a penis-like organ, and sperm is transferred during copulation. In the case of parasitic species, which often have difficulty finding a partner, self-fertilization is used as a means of reproduction, also known as hermaphroditism. Sperm and egg fuse in the oviduct, which then secretes a yellow substance around the zygote. Male nematodes generally have a pair of copulatory structures called spicules, which guide the sperm during copulation. Some male nematodes also have a lateral expansion at the posterior end, called a copulatory bursa, which surrounds the female during copulation. Other males wrap their tail around the female at her genital opening during copulation. Unlike many other aschelminths, nematodes have amoeboid spermatozoa, meaning that the contents of their cells appear to be in constant motion. In some annelid species, the reproduction of polychaetes, marine worms, is synchronized with lunar phases. During the reproductive period, the body of both sexes undergoes differentiation into two distinct parts, an anterior part and a posterior part called the epitoke, which houses the reproductive organs. When the moon reaches a particular phase, the epitoke detaches from the rest of the body and swims to the water's surface. It seems that female epitokes induce male epitokes to release sperm, triggering the expulsion of eggs. Fertilization takes place outside the bodies of the individuals and is so well orchestrated that numerous epitokes emerge at the water's surface virtually simultaneously. When they reach sexual maturity, oligochaetes develop a special organ called a clitellum, which is characterized by a saddle-shaped glandular thickening located near the genital orifices. During mating, the clitellum secretes a mucus whose role is to keep the worms together during the sperm exchange. After mating, the clitellum continues to play an important role. It secretes a substance that forms a cocoon around the worm in which the eggs and sperm are deposited. The worm then manipulates this cocoon until it slides over its head. The ends of the cocoon seal, allowing fertilization and development to take place inside. When it comes to gamete fusion in mollusks, several methods are used. Marine bivalves, for example, simultaneously release sperm and eggs into the marine environment, while some freshwater clams appear to be capable of self-fertilization. However, among the marine gastropods of the Scalidae family, an unusual reproductive variety stands out. They produce two types of spermatozoa. A large spermatozoon with a degenerated nucleus serves as a vehicle for transporting numerous small, fertilizing spermatozoa through the water to the oviduct of another individual. Male cephalopods, on the other hand, have specially modified arms for transferring spermatophores. In squid, for example, the right or left fourth arm is adapted to this function. After an often elaborate courtship display, the male squid uses this modified appendage to extract spermatophores from their reserve in his own body and deposit them in the female's mantle cavity. A cementing substance released by the spermatophore fixes it firmly to the female's body, close to the oviduct. In some species, the male may even sacrifice his arm in the process, and the female may manipulate the eggs with her arms. In the case of land snails, unusual behaviors have evolved in parallel with sperm transfer. Prior to copulation, calcium carbonate darts are forcefully propelled from the genital opening of each mating individual to lodge in the partner's viscera. Although snails adopt a mating position, sperm transfer can only occur when each snail has been stimulated by the impact of the dart. Like mollusks, arthropods display a wide variety of methods for achieving sperm fertilization of eggs. Although arthropods have relatively few specialized structures for sperm transfer, many species stand out for their high behavioral complexity. For example, male and female scorpions engage in a complex ritual. In some species, the male produces spermatophores, which he anchors to the ground. During the ritual dance, the female is positioned over the spermatophore. The male then exerts pressure on the female until the sperm packet is forced into her genital chamber, where it attaches itself with small hooks. Fertilization thus takes place inside the female's body. In the case of some spiders, males use their pedipalp, an appendage used for gripping and crushing, which contains a bulb and an extensible, coiled structure called an embolus. At the start of mating, the male dips his pedipalp into his own sperm, then inserts the embolus into the female's genital opening, transferring the spermatozoa into her seminal receptacle. The female deposits the collected sperm with her eggs in a silken cocoon, which she attaches to her own body or to an object such as a stone or leaf. In other arthropods, such as copepods, isopods, and many decapods, sperm transfer generally takes place after courtship, using modified appendages, gonopods, or spermatophores. For example, copepods grasp the female with their antennae while placing a spermatophore at the opening of the seminal receptacle. For some decapods, fertilization occurs when the eggs are released into the water. In insects, fertilization is always an internal process, but there are many variations in the way sperm is delivered to the female. In some species, males produce spermatophores, which are deposited in the female's copulatory bursa or vagina. The wall of the spermatophore ruptures, allowing the sperm to swim to the seminal receptacle. In other species, sperm are introduced directly into the seminal receptacle via an intromittent organ. In still other cases, the spermatozoa, without spermatophores, are deposited in the copulatory bursa and then migrate to the seminal receptacle. In all cases, the sperm are retained in the seminal receptacle until after fertilization. An exception to this sperm transfer pathway occurs in insects, which inject sperm into the female's homocoel, i.e., the space between the body's organs. The sperm then migrate to the ovary and oviduct, where they fuse with the eggs before the shell is formed. Invertebrates have developed a variety of strategies to protect their fertilized eggs in developing embryos, and to ensure a supply of nutrients for young individuals. This adaptation is particularly marked in freshwater and terrestrial species. For example, sponges and coelenterates facing seasonal drought conditions create a resistant envelope for their eggs, preventing water loss. Many turbellarians encase their eggs in a capsule, which they attach to a hard surface where the embryos develop until they hatch. Other turbellarians keep the encapsulated eggs inside their own bodies until development is complete and the young emerge. Parasitic flatworms, as well as most nematodes and rotifers, enclose their eggs in a protective capsule, where development takes place after the parental body has emerged. However, some nematode species are oviviparous, meaning that eggs hatch inside the maternal body. In many species, the amount of yolk contained in the egg and the structure of the egg capsule are linked to the annual seasons. In general, summer eggs have less yolk and thinner capsules than winter eggs. This seasonal correlation is also found in many crustaceans. Freshwater and terrestrial annelids create a protective cocoon for their offspring, often deposited in a humid environment. However, some leeches do not form a cocoon. Instead, they attach the eggs, wrapped in a protective membrane, to the underside of the parent. During development, the adult leech undulates its body to allow water currents to flow over the young, which can be used for aeration. Freshwater mollusks have the option of surrounding their eggs with a protective envelope or incubating them directly. Bivalves release their mature eggs into their gill chambers, where they are fertilized and embryonic development is completed, thus ensuring protection. Cephalopods such as squid and octopus attach their eggs to a surface, then generate regular jets of water to keep the egg masses free of debris and potentially oxygenated. Some echinoderms also incubate their eggs until the young hatch. Arthropods have a wide variety of strategies for ensuring the survival of their offspring. These include brood pouches, commonly found in brachiopods, isopods, and amphipods. These pockets can be a part of the carapace or form by enlarged plates on the sternum. Crayfish, on the other hand, attach fertilized eggs to their fins and transport them as they are incubated by the female. The most elaborate adaptations for embryos are found in terrestrial arthropods, notably insects. While some species simply lay their eggs and abandon them, others keep the eggs encapsulated inside their bodies during early development. Some species are viviparous, meaning they carry developing young. For example, the eggs of some scorpion species contain little or no yolk, the embryo being fed by the parent in a similar way to mammalian reproduction. In scorpions, part of the oviduct is transformed into a uterus to house the embryo, while another part, close to the female's intestine, absorbs the nutrients passed on to the developing young. Similar adaptations are found in some viviparous insects, with larvae fed by the glandular secretions of the uterine mucosa. The reproductive organs of vertebrates include the gonads and associated ducts and glands. In addition, some vertebrates, including some very primitive fish species, have specific organs for sperm transfer or egg laying. The gonads are responsible for producing the gametes and hormones essential for reproduction. The ducts and associated glands store and transport the gametes, while secreting the substances required for the reproductive process. In addition to these structures, most vertebrates, whether male or female, have a cloaca. This is a cavity that serves as a common final chamber for the digestive, urinary, and reproductive systems, enabling evacuation to the outside world. In the case of lampreys and most ray-finned fish, the cloaca may be small or absent, and the digestive tract has a separate external opening, called the anus. In some teleost species, the digestive, genital, and urinary tracts open independently of each other. Hagfish, closely related to lampreys, have a small cloaca. In many non-mammalian vertebrates, such as reptiles and birds, the upper part of the cloaca is divided by folds into the urogenital chamber and a feeding chamber, both of which open into a common terminal chamber. In monotremes, such as the platypus, and echidna, the embryonic cloaca is completely divided into a urogenital sinus, responsible for transporting urine and gonad products, and an alimentary tract, both of which open out independently. The gonads are formed from longitudinal thickenings of coelomic, epithelium, and underlying mesenchyme. Initially, these gonadal crests emerge into the coelomic cavity and are continuous with the embryonic kidney. The germinal epithelium covering these gonadal crests gives rise to the primary sexual cords, which penetrate the underlying mesenchymal tissue. The secondary sex cords develop inwards, just below the germinal epithelium, to form a cortical region. If the gonad is destined to become a testis, only the medullary component differentiates. However, if the gonad is destined to become an ovary, only the cortical component undergoes differentiation. The sizes of adult reproductive organs vary according to the development of certain parts of the reproductive system. In some groups of animals, such as lampreys, hagfish, sharks, rays, and bony fish, differentiation of reproductive parts is extensive, resulting in reproductive organs extending over a large part of the body. In amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, on the other hand, the front part of the reproductive organs at the end of the body generally does not develop, except in toads, where only the rear part undergoes this differentiation process. Some vertebrate species have a singularity in the number of gonads, with a single gonad either located in the midline or on one side of the body. This feature is most common in females. For example, adult cyclostomes, whether male or female, have a single gonad. In lampreys, this is located in the middle of the body, while in hagfish, it is on the right side. In birds, most females have a single gonad. However, male birds generally have a pair of testes. There are exceptions to this rule, notably among falcons, since more than half of mature individuals have two well-developed ovaries. It should be noted that in all bird species, a small percentage of females probably have two ovaries, with reports indicating the presence of this characteristic in owls, parrots, sparrows, and doves. For example, it is estimated that 5 to 25% of doves have two ovaries. Some teleost and viviparous elasmobranch species also have a single gonad. In amniotes, i.e. reptiles, birds, and mammals, the presence of unpaired gonads is unusual. However, some lizards have a single testis, and some female crocodiles have a single ovary. Among mammals, the platypus generally has a single ovary on the left, while some bat species have only a right ovary. There are two possible explanations for the presence of unpaired gonads. On the one hand, paired embryonic gonadal crests may fuse to give rise to a median gonad, as is the case in lampreys and perch. On the other hand, a single gonadal crest can accommodate primordial germ cells by migration, i.e., sperm or immature eggs, with the result that the opposite gonad does not develop, as is the case in chickens and ducks. It has been observed that falcons generally possess an equal number of primordial germ cells in both gonadal crests. resulting in the presence of 2 ovaries. In lower vertebrates, mature gonads sometimes produce both sperm and eggs, giving rise to what is known as hermaphroditism. This characteristic is more common in cyclostomes and teleosts than in other fish. Teleosts may function as males at the start of their reproductive cycle, then transform into females later on. In some teleost families, sperm and eggs mature simultaneously, but develop in separate parts of the gonad. These fish usually act as males during one breeding season and as females the next. Cyclostomes are generally ambisexual during their juvenile phase, meaning that immature male and female sex cells coexist side by side, or, in the case of hagfish, the anterior part of the immature gonad may be an ovary, while the caudal part is a testis. It is assumed that cyclostomes generally become unisexual at maturity. In amphibians, hermaphroditism is uncommon, although anomalies can sometimes cause it. In vertebrates above amphibians, true hermaphroditism appears to be rare or non-existent. Male and female duct systems may sometimes be non-existent. In cyclostomes, some elasmobranch species and teleosts such as salmon, trout, and eels, gametes are transported to the posterior part of the coelomic cavity, often by means of cilia, tiny hair-like structures, and are expelled via 2 funnel-shaped genital tracts located near the base of the tail. In anurans and amniotes such as reptiles, birds, and mammals, and even in some teleosts, the testes are mainly composed of seminiferous tubules. These tubules are coiled, and their walls contain cells responsible for sperm production. The walls of the tubules in the testes are made up of several layers of a type of cell called germinal epithelium. In these tubules are the cells responsible for sperm production. There are also Sertoli cells, which play a nutritive role, helping the developing spermatozoa. The seminiferous tubules, which start at the outer layer of the testicles, curve inwards. They join to form a network of collecting tubules called the testicular network. In some amniotes, such as the rat, the seminiferous tubules may be open and travel a zigzag path from the network to the periphery and vice versa. On average, these tubules are about 30 centimeters long and rarely have interconnections between them. In many mammals, the tubules are grouped into lobules separated by walls of connective tissue. This organization enables a large quantity of germinal epithelium to be concentrated in a restricted space. In immature males and in adult males outside the breeding season, the seminiferous tubules are barely visible and the epithelium is inactive. However, in some species, spermatogenesis, i.e. the production of spermatozoa, can take place continuously throughout the year. An active epithelium may display all stages of sperm development. Within the lumen of the tubules are the tails of numerous spermatozoa, whose heads are embedded in Sertoli cells, free spermatozoa, as well as fluid that is probably resorbed. In certain groups of animals, such as cyclostomes, most fish and amphibians with tails, the organization of male reproductive cells is different from that of the vertebrates previously mentioned. Instead of seminiferous tubules, there are a large number of small sacs, or cysts, in which sperm cells develop. Unlike other vertebrates, the cells lining these cysts are not germinal in nature, i.e., they are not directly involved in sperm production. Instead, the cysts serve as protective environments for sperm development. In the process of sperm production, germ cells move from a permanent germinal zone, which may be located at the periphery of the testes, or along a ridge at the tip of the testis, depending on the species. Once inside the cysts, these germ cells begin to multiply significantly, producing large numbers of sperm. This multiplication leads to pronounced swelling of the cysts, making them appear whitish. As a result, the whole testicle takes on a swollen, granular appearance. When the spermatozoa reach maturity, they detach from the walls of the cysts in which they have grown and swim freely in the fluid contained within these sacs. Eventually, these small sacs rupture, releasing the sperm into ducts. In some fish, such as cyclostomes and teleosts, sperm are ejected into a special cavity called the coelomic cavity. Once expelled, the empty cysts can either regenerate to form new sacs or be populated by new germ cells. Leydig cells, also known as interstitial cells, are present in most, if not all, vertebrates. They are thought to be a major source of androgens, or male hormones. However, Leydig cells are not always easily discernible, and in some bird species, they can only be identified by electron microscopy. In the testis of the rat, and probably in many other animals, there is a network of small blood vessels called capillaries. These blood vessels are arranged so that the blood that is supplied the Leydig cells, located in the testicle, moves to the tubules, which are the important parts responsible for sperm production. It is therefore entirely possible that the hormones produced by these Leydig cells have a direct effect on the reproductive cells, influencing the sperm production process. With the exception of mammals, the testes of vertebrates are located inside the body. This arrangement is also observed in many, sometimes all members of mammalian orders, such as monotremes, insectivores, hyracoids, edentates, sirenians, cetaceans, and proboscideans. Some male mammals, such as most marsupials, ungulates, and primates after infancy, have a special structure called the scrotum, where the testes permanently reside. However, some mammals have a pouch that allows the testes to descend and retract using muscles. This includes some rodents, such as ground squirrels, most if not all bats, and some primitive primates, such as lorises and potos. Rabbits, most rodents, and some insectivores do not have scrotal sacs, but do have a structure called the inguinal canal. This canal allows the testicles of these animals to be pulled or retracted into the abdomen in the event of injury or other dangerous situations. When the testicles are pulled up into the inguinal canal, this causes temporary swelling of the area between the anus and the perineum. However, it's important to note that a small number of mammals keep their testes permanently in the perineal region, instead of pulling them up and down in the inguinal canal. The scrotum is an essential part of the body for regulating testicular temperature. It cools the testicles by bringing the warm blood flowing towards them closer to the blood vessels through which the cold blood leaves the testicles. This temperature regulation is important, as sperm cells develop optimally at temperatures slightly lower than normal body temperature. It's essential to note that when both testes fail to descend into the scrotal sacs, a condition known as cryptorchidism, this can lead to permanent infertility. In other words, the affected animal cannot produce sperm effectively. Birds, like mammals, are homeothermic animals, which means they maintain a constant body temperature. Their testes are located close to the air sacs, which are extensions of the respiratory tract. This enables birds to regulate the temperature of their testes in a similar way to the scrotum in mammals, adjusting blood flow to maintain optimal conditions for sperm production. Reproduction in the animal kingdom illustrates a fascinating and complex story of adaptation and innovation in the face of changing environmental challenges. Over billions of years, living organisms have evolved from simple modes of reproduction, such as asexual cell division, to much more complex systems of sexual reproduction, offering increased genetic variability and improved survival strategies. The diversity of reproductive methods is reflected in the incredible variety of approaches to carrying and rearing offspring, from egg-laying in nests to internal gestation and live births. This complex evolution testifies to the ability of living organisms to adapt and respond to environmental challenges, while highlighting the delicate interactions and trade-offs inherent in life on Earth. As we look to the future and continue our exploration of the natural world, we're ready to discover even more wonders and mysteries. Reproduction in animals is a never-ending story of remarkable discoveries, surprises, and adaptations, reflecting the ingenuity of nature and the richness of life on our planet. In the next part, we take a deeper dive into the mechanisms and curiosities of animal reproduction, revealing even more astonishing aspects of this fascinating facet of biology. Shortly after the terrible mass extinction that the Earth suffered, the huge continental plate that covers it, Pangea, broke up. The Panthalassa Ocean has been sinking into the western part of Pangea for a few tens of millions of years. This oceanic opening widens, advances towards the west, and a new ocean is formed, the Tethys Ocean. Pangea is divided into two continental blocks. In the north, Laurasia, and in the south, Gondwana. The development of the Tethys Ocean has consequences on the climate, on the ecology, and on the geography of the Earth. The climate, which was predominantly continental, becomes oceanic. The rise in sea level is caused by the activation of new oceanic ripples. Biodiversity flourishes thanks to the flooding of new continental surfaces. Separated lands, however, limit exchanges between individuals. Eventually, some populations will be completely isolated and will become full species that will evolve and diversify on each continent. For now, the planet is empty in terms of biodiversity. The Great Permian extinction left only a few survivors. Faced with these vast expanses to conquer, they have the opportunity to evolve and diversify. This is the beginning of a new adventure in the history of the Earth. The Tethys Ocean, its heat and its dizzying depths are a godsend for the marine fauna. It is hot on Earth. The level of oxygen in the atmosphere is low, the level of CO2 is high, and the atmosphere on the planet is like a huge greenhouse. The flora has suffered the catastrophe of the Siberian traps, but it was much less brutal than for the animal world. Even if vast areas were devastated, in only a few thousand years, a flourishing vegetation decorates again the continental surface. The animals that survived conquered this new environment and settled there. Time passes, they will adapt, evolve, and new species will appear, creating new branches. This is evolution. Insects, on the other hand, continue to evolve, improving over the years. They are everywhere, already present by millions. Jawed butterflies, pollen crushers, flies already very similar to our current flies, or the first cicadas, and the first bugs share the air. 250 million years ago, the seas were repopulated by a multitude of new inhabitants. Among them, mollusks flourish fully, including belemnites and ammonites. The latter are present in greater numbers. Ammonites flourish and proliferate in waters that are 250 million years old. They are related to the class of cephalopods, which literally means feet in the head. Their feet are a kind of tentacles that surround their head. Several species of ammonites have been identified. They live rolled up in a spiral shell that is divided into chambers. Most of them are filled with gas or water to guarantee the buoyancy of the animal. To go down to the seabed, ammonites fill their lodges with water, and to go up to the surface they fill them with gas. The animal occupies the last compartment. Throughout their life, ammonites grow and build new lodges. These mollusks populate all the seas of the world, rather in the open waters than in the seabed. They present a great variety of size. Even if most of them measure a few centimeters or inches, some can reach up to 2 meters or 6 feet in diameter, the size of a tractor wheel. They are good swimmers. Alongside ammonites, belemnites have a very different shape, rather elongated, reminiscent of a javelin. Their head is provided with a beak and 2 prominent eyes. Their 10 tentacles have hooks and suction cups that allow them to catch their prey. Some species have a pocket of ink that they release to conceal their escape from predators. "15 million years later, small groups of archosaurian reptiles took over the ecological niches left vacant after the previous mass extinction. In the seas, hybodonts are found in large numbers. These fish were initially small, between 20 and 30 centimeters, or about 10 inches, and fed on tiny prey. A few million years later, they grew to a size of 3 meters, or 10 feet in length. Thanks to their great capacity to adapt to salt water, they diversified. They developed teeth, allowing them to tear and crush. The class of condycthrians, distant cousins of today's sharks, are at the top of the food chain. But in front of them, new marine inhabitants are trying to make a place for themselves underwater, the reptiles. Some families are more like aborted evolutionary attempts, like placodonts. These marine reptiles feed on hard prey, shellfish, or crustaceans. At the beginning of their appearance, they resemble iguanas, only bigger, since they reach 1 to 2 meters in length. In order to protect their bodies, placodots develop bony plates on their backs that resemble a carapace. At the end of their evolution, they look more like our current sea turtles. Their size allowed them to ward off the first predators, but over the years, new reptiles, larger and more ferocious, appeared, causing the disappearance of placodots. Other reptiles, on the other hand, had a long and grandiose reign, such as the ichthyosaurs. These animals frequent the seas of the blue planet. The oldest ichthyosaurs resemble finned lizards, while the most recent ones resemble tuna, but their characteristics remain unique. Their leg bones have evolved into swimming paddles and are reminiscent of a corncob. Their vertebrae resemble an ice hockey puck, and their eyes are encircled by a bone called a sclera ring. When ichthyosaurs dive and swim, the water exerts pressure that can distort sensitive parts such as the eyes, so the sclerotic ring strengthens the eye and gives the animals highly developed eyesight for their size. Ichthyosaurs measure from 70 centimeters or 30 inches to 20 meters or 65 feet in length. They are fond of belemnites, fish, and other marine organisms. Like all living things, they need to breathe. Although their oxygen consumption is low, they have lungs and must regularly come to the surface of the water to breathe. Ichthyosaurs are viviparous. Their eggs are not laid, but incubate in the genital tract of the female until they hatch and release their young in the open sea. The latter have subsequently acquired the ability to regulate their temperature. Ichthyosaurs move by swimming in a particular way. They undulate their whole body like lizards, and can thus accelerate easily to hunt or flee. Their more recent representatives, which are more like tuna, only undulate the posterior part of their body. This evolution in their way of swimming generates an important modification of their living environment. If, at the beginning, they were confined to the continental shelf, from now on, they ply the great waters of the oceans. It is, moreover, a generalized evolution. The fragmentation of the pangea generates a dispersion of the marine fauna, which colonizes the high sea. On Earth, the surviving families of the previous extinction are the most widespread. At the top of the food chain, archosauromorph reptiles dominate. The more basal ones give rise to the archosaurs, and then emerge the pterosaurs. Pterosaurs are insect-eating flying reptiles, of which there are 150 species. For a long time populated only by insects, the air environment welcomes vertebrate animals. The Quetzalcoatlus is one of the largest specimens that can reach 12 meters or 40 feet wingspan, the equivalent of a small passenger plane. It has an elongated head, a long neck, and its tail is almost non-existent. The wing of the pterosaur is formed by a membrane of skin, connected to the hind limb, and supported by the fourth finger very elongated. In order to remain light during their numerous flights, pterosaurs have hollow bones. These animals fly over the forests of ginkgo and ferns in search of food. Since they do not have a highly developed olfactory center, they use their vision to flush out insects, fish, and birds. Although they are comfortable in the air, pterosaurs also frequent the aquatic environment and move around on land. Their feet are webbed, and they adopt a quadrupedal gait to move. On land, The Archosaurian lineage produced the first crocodiliforms with Protosuchus. This animal has an appearance very similar to that of crocodiles, with a large mouth decorated with powerful teeth and a long tail. The lineage of archosaurs gave birth to the first dinosaurs a little later. This is still a far cry from the giant predators we imagine when we think of dinosaurs. The Euraptor is one of the first known dinosaurs to have appeared on Earth. It later gave birth to the long-necked sauropods. It is about 1 meter or 3 feet long and 40 centimeters or 16 inches high, the equivalent of a large dog. It has been called the Dawn Hunter. It is the fastest animal of its time. It is omnivorous and feeds on other reptiles, insects, but also on all sorts of other foods that provide it with proteins and vitamins. The Colophysis is a bit bigger than the Euraptor. It can reach up to 3 meters or 10 feet long and 55 centimeters or 20 inches high. Its large tail occupies half of its body. Thanks to its narrow mouth, it catches small prey quickly. When hunting in a pack, like our modern wolves, it attacks larger prey. These different species shared the land with the first herbivorous dinosaurs, which were larger and more numerous. Among them, the flatfish is an animal that measures up to 10 meters or 30 feet in length and can weigh up to 4 tons. Its diet is mainly composed of plants. Thanks to its very sharp and robust teeth, it crushes the plants that it extracts directly from the tree. Its long neck, composed of 10 vertebral elements, gives it strength and power to defend itself and allows it to pull plants even from the treetops. Next to the first dinosaurs, the mammalian reptiles are largely represented by the order Therapsids, but their population tends to decrease due to the emergence of new branches during this period. This does not prevent the Lystrosaurus and the huge Lysowicea from roaming the wilderness. The Lystrosaurus is a mixture of mammal and reptile. It measures 1 meter long and 1.5 meters high. Its fangs protrude from its upper jaw, which gives it a fearsome look. It has a beak that resembles that of turtles, ideal for chewing plants and satisfying its needs as a large herbivore. It sometimes crosses the path of the Lysowicea, an enormous animal which reaches the size of our current elephants. This herbivore uses its long beak to catch and crush vegetation. The Lysowicea is the prey of carnivorous archosaurs and is regularly hunted by them. The first mammalia forms appear a few million years later. They are the intermediaries between cynodonts and mammals. Under the appearance of our modern shrews, the Megazostrodon goes out at night to feed on insects and lizards. It is the prey of the first dinosaurs and must therefore be careful. Its small size, about 10 centimeters or a few inches, allows it to easily take cover. Adelabasileus is the oldest known ancestor of proto-mammals. It has in its ear a cochlea with a place close to that of the modern mammals. It is the link between the Therapsids and the mammals that will soon appear. All these small animals live alongside formidable carnivorous predators. This is why most of them have adapted to life at night. In its skull, its cortex is more developed than that of the reptiles of the time, and it has a neocortex which ensures the cognitive functions. These attributes require a higher energy consumption. They must feed on energetic foods such as herbs, fruits, and insects. Two large groups of dinosaurs dominate and are differentiated by the anatomy of their pelvis. They are named ornithischians and saurischians. Saurischians have a pubis directed forward. They are, for the most part, carnivores, but we also find in this group the huge sauropods herbivores with long necks. The ornithischians, as for them, have a pubis directed towards the back, what evokes the basins of the current birds. They are all herbivores. Mammals seem to have been forgotten during this long period when dinosaurs predominated. And yet, our distant mammalian ancestors, tiny and fearful creatures, lurked in the shadow of the giants. These primitive mammals have reason to be afraid. Dinosaurs diversified, expanded, and pushed the anatomical limits of life on Earth. They occupy most of the ecological niches, and what is left to mammals is small, dark, like caves, caverns, hollows in trees, or underground life. Surviving in such environments imposes constraints on size and lifestyle, but also an overdevelopment of the senses. Smell, sight, and hearing allow them to have a nocturnal life, which is less dangerous towards predators who are less active there. The organs of the senses being concentrated in the head, this induces a larger brain size compared to that of reptiles. And this is not all. The brain-burning energy that must be constantly renewed, specific adaptations appear. Mammals have warm blood and a coat that isolates them. The constant need for energy requires protein-rich food, such as insects or other invertebrates and plant seeds. These foods must be quickly digested to release energy as quickly as possible. This is how sharp teeth appear. Thanks to their dagger-sharp, powerful and sharp teeth, mammals now catch and kill insects, crush hard shells. These teeth are operated by strong jaw muscles. The means of reproduction evolves. While the eggs of reptiles and birds have already seen considerable progress with the appearance of the protective shell, this system remains limited, since the egg must be large enough to allow the newly born animal to be sufficiently developed to fend for itself. In addition, eggs and newborns attract predators. Mammals take a different approach. They keep and feed the embryo in the mother's body to ensure a better start in life. Although this method limits the number of offspring and depletes the mother's resources, it has enough advantages to become the primary mode of reproduction. The forces that had enabled the formation of Pangea a few million years ago are working hard to break it up. The first signs of the opening of the Atlantic Ocean are felt. The Earth's crust floats on the mantle, which is made of molten rock. The continental plates move, which causes an active circulation of magma. The more Pangea breaks up, the more volcanic activity intensifies, until exceptional quantities of lava gush out on the surface of the Earth. A new mass extinction begins. Monstrous jets of burning steam come out of the bowels of the Earth. The entrained debris rises to more than 1,500 meters or 5,000 feet above the ground. A fiery cloud surrounds the fauna and flora. Animals try to find refuge in the heights or in the water. But the fragmentation of Pangea has only just begun, and the consequences will intensify. On the edges of the future Atlantic Ocean, volcanic activity is intense. In time, it will form an immense magma province that will cover 11 million square kilometers, more than the size of the United States. Millions of animals succumbed. The Megazostrodon nests with its young in a burrow, Its small size allows it to take shelter and survive the hecatomb that will follow. It is now lava that flows from the heart of the Earth. Through all the cracks that have formed, flows of magma escape. The cracks can reach several tens of kilometers or miles in length. It is therefore an ocean of flames that flows on the surface of the Earth. Everything in its path at that moment is decimated, annihilated. The lava continues to gush out for months, for decades. The eruptions that cover the Earth with a layer of lava now have a toxic effect on the atmosphere. The gas dissolved in the magma rises to the surface, lowers the pressure, and diffuses into the Earth's atmosphere. The carbon dioxide level increases powerfully. The temperatures rise. On land and in the sea, the heat is unbearable, but the worst is yet to come. The level of oxygen in the atmosphere drops dramatically. The face of the Earth is changing. New cracks appear. The Pangea is torn apart. "50,000 years after the beginning of the eruptions, the Earth shows a sad landscape. The abundant and lush vegetation has become non-existent. What once existed has dried up. The fires continue. The sky is tinged with red. The atmosphere is polluted, rich in carbon dioxide and poor in oxygen. In addition, there are ash storms that swallow up the few remaining survivors in their path. Then mixed with water vapor, these ashes give rise to acid rain. The little vegetation that remains is eradicated. The rains carry the corpses of flora and fauna into the waters. The ocean becomes a giant garbage can. The carbon dioxide dissolves in the water, making it acidic in turn. The plankton, the base of the food chain, is affected this time. The Earth is unrecognizable. Famine strikes without exception. Bacteria proliferate. Pangea is totally transformed. The cracks extend over thousands of miles and miles, and the amount of magma spill reaches 2 million square kilometers, almost 1 million square miles. It is only 500,000 years after the beginning of the catastrophe that the eruptions stop. Pangea was a distant memory, and the Atlantic Ocean was born. In total, more than 75% of the species disappeared. The toll on Earth was tragic, but the ocean suffered even greater losses. The coral reefs have almost all disappeared. The planet is emptied, and yet the world as we know it today was born. Distinct continents are now established on the surface of the Earth. Our future now depends on the few survivors of the catastrophe. The air is unbreathable, and the carbon dioxide level in the atmosphere has never been so high. And yet, a few early animals have managed to survive this cataclysm and adapt to this environment. On land or in the seas, it is the hecatomb, and the calm dominates. Two continental blocks are formed, Laurasia and Gondwana. It is in this miserable environment that the marine and terrestrial fauna and flora will have to develop. The advantage is that many ecological niches are now vacant. The misfortune of some always makes the happiness of others. If when Pangea was still in place, the climate remained dry in its center, it becomes hot and humid, following its fragmentation. The vegetation takes advantage of this new environment, favorable to its blooming. The abundant jungles do not delay to dress the face of the Earth, and to revive the papillae of the herbivores. They become numerous and of respectable size. These herbivores become quality prey for carnivorous predators that also reach disproportionate sizes. The reign of the dinosaurs begins. They established themselves on the planet until 66 million years before our era. On land, many archosaurs are still present. They live side by side with large dinosaurs, like the Diplodocus and the Brachiosaurus. The Diplodocus is a giant that measures up to 30 meters or 100 feet long, the equivalent of a basketball court, with a gigantic neck that can exceed 6 meters or 20 feet in length. Its head appears proportionately tiny, housing a brain the size of an orange. Herbivorous by nature, it catches vegetation with its long and fine teeth arranged in a rake on the front part of its jaws. Its tail consists of 80 vertebrae and measures 14 meters, or more than 45 feet. Its 4 columnar limbs support its substantial weight, but it also relies on its tail to lift its body and pick up conifer branches up to 15 meters or 50 feet high. Diplodocus regularly crosses paths with its size rival, the colossal Brachiosaurus, another herbivorous giant. The latter has a similar appearance: large body, long neck, and very small head. It moves slowly through the vast forests of conifers and ginkgos. Although herbivores populate the Earth generously, they also become prey for theropod dinosaurs, which also spread all around the globe. Carnivorous monsters of exceptional size, threatening, like the terrible allosaurs, megalosaurs, or ceratosaurs. The Allosaurus literally translates as strange lizard because of its apparent bumps on its skull. It is quite large compared to other theropods, reaching up to 9 meters or 30 feet in length. It is ferocious and feeds on meat from weaker animals. Its robust limbs with powerful claws are totally adapted to hunting. Its tail allows it to balance itself against the substantial weight of its body. But the theropod dinosaur that remains the undisputed superstar of dinosaurs to this day is the Tyrannosaurus, also known as T-Rex, literally the king of the tyrant lizards. This active predator treads the Earth's surface with strides of up to 3.75 meters or 12 feet. From its height of 4 meters to 6 meters, or 16 feet, it uses its olfactory senses to locate its food. Tyrannosaurus is one of the most violent and terrifying creatures that ever existed. Its elongated head alone reaches 1.5 meters in length, or almost 5 feet long. Its teeth measure 30 centimeters or 11 inches from tip to root. Its very short upper limbs are topped by claws and are very useful for grabbing and holding its prey. Other animals have to be careful with this carnivorous monster. The battle rages on Earth. In the midst of huge dinosaurs, smaller species are adapting to survive. Some evolve and get wings. This process is done slowly. They would have been running animals, which, by waving their arms, the beginnings of wings covered with feathers, would have succeeded in accelerating enough to lift themselves off the ground. The species that brings to light the first winged dinosaurs is the Archaeopteryx. This animal is covered with feathers, except on its legs, head, and occiput. It has a long tail, an extension of its spine, and claws on its feet and on the 3 fingers of its forelimbs. It looks more like a reptile than a bird, but Archaeopteryx is an intermediate form between reptiles and birds. The appearance of feathers occurs place initially to ensure a better insulation. Then, The feathers lengthened and ensured, in addition, a locomotor role. But Archaeopteryx is not yet fully adapted to flight. Its bones are dense, which gives it a weight too high to maintain itself in the air. The seas of the time have reefs in places that support diverse species of fish and a wide variety of marine life. Rudists, a group of marine bivalve animals, play an essential role in the development of these reefs. Frequenting warm, shallow waters, they filter seawater to feed on suspended organic particles. The rudists live fixed on the seabed with the help of one of their valves. They can reach up to 50 centimeters or 20 inches in diameter. While some live alone, others form real colonies. Placed against each other, they associate with corals, sponges, and algae to build real reefs. Laurasia and Gondwana are the two continental blocks present. Laurasia splits into two parts and reveals the future North Atlantic Ocean. 5 million years later, the southern part also opens. The Earth begins to take a familiar appearance. The climate is rather warm because there are no ice caps. The level of the oceans is high, and the temperature of the latter reaches about 10 degrees higher than our current oceans. Marine reptiles still dominate in large majority. Ichthyosaurus gave way to a newcomer, the terrifying Mosasaurus. This marine animal can reach the impressive size of 17 meters or 55 feet in length. It lives in the open ocean, several kilometers or miles from the coast. It moves by undulation, like the current crocodiles, which requires a lot of energy. It feeds on fish, birds, sharks, turtles, but also on other animals of the Mosasaur group. In the air, the small pterosaurs now show quite respectable sizes. The Quetzalcoatlus measures 15 meters or 50 feet in wingspan. On land, the huge dinosaurs still dominate. New species appear, like the Triceratops. Adorned with 3 large horns on its head and a bony ruff, it is intimidating and can protect itself in case of attacks from other dinosaurs. It is not uncommon for it to have to defend itself from the huge T-Rex. Possessing at least 30 rows of teeth, this herbivore can tear up and crush even the most perennial plants. The mammals are there, small and discreet in the shadow of these giants of nature. In the animal kingdom, they have no importance at the moment. Flowering plants called angiosperms appeared as the climate became more humid and the atmosphere became richer in oxygen. They settle in places where conifers have not succeeded in establishing themselves. They are characterized by the presence of ovules, inside grains which are contained in a closed cavity. They colonize at first the humid places, when they gain the undergrowth of floodplains, the coastal swamps. Barely 30 million years after their appearance, they are already diversified and abundant and rapidly occupy all available ecological niches. The vegetation landscape was profoundly modified, and the ecosystems evolved strongly. Insects, which were present long before flowering plants, specialize in part as consumers of pollen, an energetic commodity, very rich in protein. Moving from flower to flower in search of food, they spread the pollen that sticks to their legs without knowing it. A fruitful alliance between flowers and insects is established. Herbivorous animals develop and diversify, but also granivores, frugivores, and insectivores. A few tens of millions of years later, the terrestrial ecosystem is totally transformed. The forests that remained became covered with colors, fruits, and berries. Flocks of pollinating insects parade in the middle of this vegetation. Huge herbivorous dinosaurs feed on all this food during the day, and small lizards, birds, and mammals are busy eating the leftovers at night. It is now more than 160 million years since the immense and majestic dinosaurs dominated the Earth. A world that has been slowly built up and is about to be annihilated, marking the fifth and last great crisis of life. No animal can see the danger coming. It is about to fall from the sky, slyly, at the speed of several kilometers per second. Billions of tons of asteroids are ejected. One of them is heading towards the Earth, like a real bomb. The shock is terrible. The meteorite hit so hard that a crater of 30 kilometers or 20 miles deep is drawn. An energy of a monumental intensity is released, causing the transformation of the rock of the Earth's crust into liquid element. Within a radius of 60 kilometers or 40 miles around the impact, the water turns into water vapor, and animals are immediately killed. Within seconds of impact, the shock wave reaches the ocean before dissipating. Everything in its path is literally vaporized. The consequences will soon be felt. The impact of the meteorite causes an earthquake of unparalleled intensity. The animals that did not fall into the crevices try to find shelter, but the catastrophe does not stop there. A wall of water, as big as a mountain range, rises and falls on the coast. The tsunami spares no one. On land and in the sea, everything is swept away, washed away and thrown on the shore. As the Earth tries to catch its breath, the rocks that were propelled during the impact fall back. A shower of whole pieces of the Earth's crust falls on the Earth for several hours. The temperature of the atmosphere rises to more than 500 degrees Celsius and 930 degrees Fahrenheit in places. All creatures are vulnerable to the cataclysm. The planet is unrecognizable. Billions of animals will die. In the seas, 76% of species and 15% of families will become extinct forever. On the continents, 6% of families will disappear. Although the most famous crisis, the Cretaceous extinction, is nevertheless the most modest in terms of extinction rate. Biodiversity is still heavily impacted. Ammonites, large marine and terrestrial reptiles, disappeared, and the field was left open for small mammals to multiply and grow. Several months after the impact, the Earth undergoes a return to cold. The heat released by the meteorite has generated large quantities of carbon dioxide, which absorbs the heat. The Earth is about to live a long winter before finding a more stable climate. India, which was part of Gondwanaland, was slowly separated from the continent a few million years ago. It was wisely heading south, but was deflected and oriented north. As the plate crossed the Tethys Ocean, it passed over a zone of hotspot volcanism and saw its course accelerate. Its sudden displacement leads it to Asia, which it violently collides. India sinks under Asia at a speed of 2 centimeters or 0.8 inches per year. As a result, its crust is lifting and overlapping like scales on top of each other. India's crust thickened, and a mountain range was formed several million years later, the Himalayas. Northern India is compressed and loses 1,000 kilometers or 620 miles of extension. The fragments ejected from Asia will give the Southeast Asian bloc, the archipelago of Indonesia, and the Japanese archipelago. The face of our current planet continues to be assembled in the manner of a puzzle. The Earth is perpetually subject to earthquakes and volcanism. A strong volcanic episode that started around 60 million years ago releases a large amount of CO2. The lower atmosphere and ocean waters warm up initially. In the long term, the increase in greenhouse gases causes a rapid and generalized warming over the entire surface of the Earth. Ocean surface waters rise by 5 degrees Celsius, or increase by 9 degrees Fahrenheit. Greenland, Alaska, and Siberia are being covered by subtropical forests. This warm and humid environment is conducive to the development of life and coincides with an evolutionary radiation of mammals. The large extinct reptiles have left free niches, and mammals intend to take advantage of it. Some animals will develop to the point of mastering swimming or flying, like whales, dolphins, or bats. Primates, horses, and primitive deer start their different lineages. Birds multiply, and some species reach impressive dimensions with more than 2 meters in height. Insects and flowering plants continue to evolve with each other. In the Frankfurt area of Germany, a violent volcanic eruption leaves a large deep crater open. Quickly occupied by the waters of a lake, this crater shelters an abundance of fauna and flora, allowing life on the surface. Amidst 1,000 diverse species of plants and animals, a small mammal stands out as the oldest common ancestor between the lineage that led to humans, monkeys, and lemurs. Darwinius massillae, better known as Ida, is morphologically close to present-day lemurs. It measures 1 meter, or 3.2 feet in length, and weighs between 650 and 900 grams, i.e., between 1.4 and 2 pounds. It is herbivorous and feeds on seeds, leaves, and fruits. It has a particularity. Its thumb, opposite to the other fingers, allows it to grasp, which brings it closer to primates. It also has no claws on its fingers, normally used by lemurs, and has a bone structure on its feet, the talus, which is similar to that of monkeys. It is situated before the separation of the 2 lineages, leading on one side to the monkeys and on the other to the lemurs. The life that remains in this crater lake is suddenly wiped out, probably by upwelling of carbon dioxide from the bottom of the lake. The animals are subjected to a rapid death. After the warm period, ocean circulation and plate tectonics lead to a cooling of the Earth. A current prefiguring the Gulf Stream weakens and sea ice gradually settles around and over Antarctica. It accumulates to the point that mountain glaciers are formed. A current that thermally isolates Antarctica is established, the Antarctic Circumpolar Current. It is the most powerful current on Earth. This current connects the oceans in the southern hemisphere and plays an important role in the circulation of waters of different salinity and temperature. It is cold, contains dissolved gases, and is one of the main reservoirs of CO2. The complete opening of Antarctica permanently cuts off ape populations from the New World, the Americas, and the Old World with Africa, Asia, and Europe. Some primates that remained on African lands managed to reach the American continent. Did they cross the Atlantic Ocean on floating natural rafts, or did they travel through chains of emerged volcanoes? The method is still unclear, but they settled in the forests of the New World. They will later be at the origin of tamarins, marmosets, or other howler monkeys characterized by their tails that wrap around the branches. The platyrrhines owe their name to the shape of their nose, which is flattened and equipped with a thick septum and large nostrils directed towards the outside. The catarrhins, or Old World monkeys, arrived from Asia on the African continent. They owe their name to their nostrils positioned on the sides. Africa appeared to them as an ideal place to live, and they gave birth to two different groups. The cercopithecids, equipped with a tail that serves as a balance, and the hominoids without a tail. These last ones know a consequent development almost entirely concentrated in East Africa. "20 million years ago, the first proconsuls appeared. These quadrupeds use their forelimbs of identical length to climb trees. They will diversify and give birth to species of all sizes. It is at this time that the group of hominids appears, which gathers the current chimpanzees, gorillas, orangutans, and the man. 18 million years ago, the African continent and Asia collided. This collision will have an impact on the evolution of human history because 2 million years later, the seas are lower and the apes can then move to Eurasia. Western and Central Europe were then covered with luxuriant forests, an environment that favored the evolution of Old World monkeys that gave birth to the gibbon. The mode of movement by hanging from trees is widespread. Their arms are longer than their legs, and their hands are larger, with curved phalanges. As these monkeys straighten up, their pelvis and spine also become more rigid. Toomai, ancestor of the man. The hominin lineage separated from the great ape 7 million years ago. Toomai, which means hope of life, is the oldest known hominin representative. The region of Chad, where Toomai was found, enjoyed a generous climate at the time. In the heart of savannas teeming with life and forests bordered by lakes, Toomai, a small being of about 1.20 meters, or 4 feet, for about 30 kilos or 60 pounds, evolved. Other species live alongside him, such as crocodiles, elephants, small rodents, fish, and wild pigs. Facing them, predators and scavengers include species close to hyenas and felines. Toomai and his fellow creatures did not have an easy life. Despite their probable bipedalism, they are not adapted to running, although they can also run by leaning on their phalanges. Unlike chimpanzees, they do not have large canines to defend themselves, and therefore rely on their sense of smell, hearing, and sight to protect themselves. Their group spirit is also an asset. They are certainly vegetarian, with a diet based on fruits. Toomai has primitive features and a cranial capacity equivalent to that of the chimpanzee, which does not prevent it from possessing considerable intelligence and a certain social structure. Toomai is a unique mixture of morphological characters, different from what is observed in chimpanzees, and the ancestral species of man. 6 million years ago, Auroran roamed the lands of present-day Kenya. With both simian and human characteristics, the features of its humerus and femur bring it closer to modern man than to Australopithecus. It is clearly bipedal and arboreal, as shown by its curved phalanges. It feeds on fruits and is the prey of fearsome predators such as large carnivores. It lives in an environment of dry evergreen forest, interspersed with wetlands. A little taller and heavier than its ancestor Tumai, some measure 1.4 meters or 4.5 feet, weighing nearly 50 kilograms or 110 pounds. A little after Tumai and Auroran, the Ardipithecines lived just before the arrival of the Australopithecines. At that time, fire was not mastered, and living conditions were harsh. Tools had not yet been perfected. Bipedalism is again invoked for this genus. These three species that lived between 7 and 4 million years ago are at the base of our phylogenetic tree. They are a bit of an intermediary between the primate ancestors and the Australopithecines. The Australopithecus genus is found mostly in central, eastern, and southern Africa, in savanna areas near rivers and lakes. It is not before 2.5 million years that they migrated to Asia, then even later to Europe. The oldest Australopithecines are qualified as gracile. They are small in size and have a smaller brain than the following ones. Their jaws are finer than those of the paranthropes, the most recent representatives, and allow them to eat an omnivorous diet. As early as 2.5 million years ago, the most recent Australopithecines appeared, described as robust. Their massive jaws and large teeth allow them to feed on tough foods such as roots and tubers. Despite their small size, about a meter or 3 feet, and a brain no larger than that of a monkey, they have mastered bipedalism permanently, and some also climb trees with ease in the forested and wooded areas they inhabit. At night, they are able to build themselves a shelter of leaves. They eat fruits, leaves, insects, and sometimes meat. Australopithecines, whose name means great apes of the south, reigned for 2 million years. The animal and plant environment remained particularly stable during this time. They have a substantial supply of game among herbivores, elephants, giraffes, wild pigs, and small rodents. Their activities are organized around hunting and gathering. However, they are limited in hunting due to their poor equipment. The Australopithecine group was made famous by the discovery of Lucy in 1974, which was then the oldest hominin fossil discovered. Near the Awash River in Hadar, Ethiopia, several hundred bone fragments of lower limbs and jaws belonging to a single individual were found at an excavation site. It is the first time that such a large proportion of bones from the same individual is found. 52 of the 206 bones that make up the skeleton of an Australopithecine. The study of her pelvis confirmed that she was indeed a woman. Lucy has many simian characteristics: her flared rib cage, a large stomach, and consequently, a vegetarian diet. Lucy is about 1.10 meters or 3.6 feet tall and weighs about 25 kilograms or 55 pounds. Its joints, shoulders, long arms, and short legs testify to an arboreal life in parallel to its bipedalism. This discovery totally changes the conceptions of the origins of the human lineage, but it will still take some time before we arrive at modern man. Before 2.5 million years ago, the two Americas were home to very different faunas. The Central American Sea separates the two continents of North and South America. The waters of the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans mix. At the bottom of the oceans, a pressure is exerted, causing the Pacific Plate to rush under the Caribbean Plate. The pressure and heat that occur during the collision form volcanoes under the seas, visible in the form of small islands that emerge. The movements of the two plates cause the seabed to rise above sea level. Over time, the open spaces between the newly formed islands are filled in with sediment until a complete closed isthmus is formed between South America and North America. This is the Isthmus of Panama. The creation of a bridge between the two previously separated lands promotes a migration of plants and animals called the Great Inter-American Exchange. Organisms from South America reach the north, such as porcupines, opossums, anteaters, armadillos, and pangolins. Conversely, horses, deer, elephants, and raccoons from the north settled in South America. For 1 million years, this transfer remained equal in exchange. Then, the mammals of the north continued to live and settle in the south, but those of the south became extinct or few in number in the north. 2.4 million years ago, new hominids appear, whose morphology is sufficiently different from that of Australopithecines living at the same period. They form a new genus, the Homo genus, to which our species Homo sapiens belongs. But it will be necessary to wait a little more before the latter appears. 3 main criteria distinguish the Homo genus: an exclusive and permanent bipedalism, a cranial capacity that became more important, accompanied by a flattened face, and the implementation of cultural activities such as artistic creations or the use of fire. Homo habilis is the first representative of the Homo genus to appear. It measures between 1.30 and 1.50 meters, that is, between 4.2 and 5 feet, and weighs between 30 and 40 kilograms, that is, between 66 and 88 pounds. It is a little larger than the Australopithecines. Physically, its teeth are smaller. It has elongated arms, sturdy legs, and curved phalanges. His hand is not freed from locomotion, and he still retains arboreal abilities. With Homo habilis, the production of tools intensified considerably, hence his name, skilled man. His diet became richer in meat, and he became omnivorous. As a perfect scavenger, he uses his tools to cut the meat and break the bones of the bodies of large mammals to extract the marrow. Appearing in the African cradle 1.9 million years ago, Homo ergaster took a decisive step in the history of the human lineage. He left the branches of trees and evolved essentially on the ground. This new mode of locomotion changes considerably his way of life. He appropriated fire and carved complex tools such as bifaces. Homo ergaster is an excellent walker and can even run over long distances. From the top of its 1.55 to 1.70 meters, that is to say, between 5 and 5.5 feet, and its 60 kilograms, or 130 pounds on average, it resembles more the modern man. It makes, for the first time, exits out of Africa with the aim of finding meat which is necessary to him in order to nourish its brain and body in growth. Homo erectus is the first hominin with a brain volume exceeding 1,000 cubic centimeters, approaching that of humans, who average 1,350 cubic centimeters. This implies a strong need for meat. Its teeth, smaller than those of other hominin species, are also adapted to this new diet. It measures between 1.50 and 1.65 meters, or between 5 and 5.4 feet, and weighs, on average, 50 kilograms or 110 pounds. Although he was not the first to venture out of Africa, he was the first to travel very long distances, thanks to his fully mastered bipedalism. He set up camp as far as Asia and Europe. Homo erectus mastered fire and made tools carved in stone, such as symmetrical bifaces, axes, and scrapers. He created a real society gathered around fire. The hunter-gatherers form a real group within which each one takes care of the others. It is in this social and family environment that Homo erectus takes care of his descendants by providing them with the energy necessary for the development of their brain. Of a more massive and stocky aspect with rather short arms and legs, the Neanderthal man resembles morphologically the current man. He measures between 1.50 and 1.70 meters, or between 5 and 5.5 feet, and weighs between 50 and 70 kilograms, or between 110 and 150 pounds. Its cerebral volume can reach up to 1,750 cubic centimeters, that is to say, more than that of the Homo sapiens. It is gifted with emotions, skilled in handling tools, and capable of dialogue and creating a culture. He practiced funeral rites, which shows that he apprehended death as a stage in his existence. After its appearance in Europe, it occupied all of Eurasia, from the British Isles to the Russian plains, via the Middle East. It is capable of adapting to very different environments and significant changes in climate. It coexisted for some 10,000 years with Homo sapiens, but then disappeared. The human lineage differentiated from other bipedal hominids 2.4 million years ago. Homo sapiens made a late entry into Earth's history, but his footprint and success are remarkable. 200,000 years ago, the species to which all humanity belongs, the only survivor of the other Homo, settled on the planet. He measures between 1.50 and 1.75 meters, or 5 and 5.7 feet, and weighs between 50 and 70 kilograms, or 110 and 150 pounds. His skull is rounded, his chin bony, and his skeleton light. In spite of difficult beginnings, it manages to colonize the Earth. He organizes himself, assembles himself, and settles in fixed places. He settles down. Hunting and gathering, which until then had been a matter of survival, gave way to agriculture and animal husbandry, which ensured stable food resources. Homo sapiens learns to master the natural environment which was previously rather hostile to him. This capacity of adaptation allows him to spread over all the regions, even the most difficult, of the planet. He shapes the landscapes and takes in abundance wood and other materials for his comfort and his needs. His success is such that his population will not stop increasing. Just like Neanderthal man, Homo sapiens buried his dead. As populations grouped together and interacted, culture spread, notably with the development of various forms of art through paintings and statues. Science and technology spread, leading to a better knowledge of nature and the design of quality tools. Homo sapiens spreads and replaces the other human species, which become extinct at its contact, without knowing exactly the reason. The last Neanderthals are observed in the Iberian Peninsula 28,000 years ago. Homo sapiens remains the only species of the genus Homo on Earth. From now on, cultural evolution takes precedence over biological evolution. Symbolic thought and art literally explode. It develops ceramics, invents new weapons such as bows and arrows, and assegai thrusters. All hominins share the common character of bipedalism. This posture is a major asset that allowed the liberation of the hands, making them available for the elaboration of tools. But the sitting position is also largely contributed to perform tasks using the hands. When they are freed, they become creative. The human hand has adapted. The thumb has developed in opposition to the other fingers. The wrist joints generate a firm grip. The fingers can fold around an object to adapt to its shape. The evolution of the nerve centers and the tactile sense influences the development of the hand and gives it useful skills and sensations. In spite of the physiological evolution of adaptation to its environment, the newborn of modern man keeps certain archaic reflexes, some of which will persist throughout life, such as the breathing reflex, the yawn, the sneeze, the fluttering of the eyelashes, the cough. The hypnic jerk is a reflex that translates as a jerk during sleep to catch up with the branches. Over thousands of years, modern man domesticates plants and animals. He settled in the Middle East in the Fertile Crescent to develop agriculture and livestock. He developed an economy of production, no longer of predation, a sedentary and urban habitat, the use of ceramics, metallurgy, and the wheel. And finally, he invented writing, which marked his entry into history more than 5,000 years ago. His sedentary life constitutes a radical turning point in the history of humanity and a revolution in the environment. Natural environments were modified, first to a limited degree in villages, then on the scale of entire regions. The herds multiply, and their immoderate appetite for vegetation is the reason for the natural landscapes. Agriculture and livestock are deployed with increasing intensity. Man nibbles the forest to obtain timber and firewood. He develops environments more suitable for his livestock and his crops. The natural space is no longer wild, but artificial. During its 5,000 years of history, Homo sapiens multiplies its numbers by a factor of 1,000. A growth of the population, coupled with an unlimited consumption. The Earth, which ended up being shaped geologically in the image of the one we know today, gave him free rein to develop. It then crisscrossed the entire planetary surface. But it is during the last 2 centuries that it increases its knowledge in an exceptional way. Its technological part grows and becomes more complex. It consumes energy and raw materials in a bulimic way, a management of the resources not sustainable in the long run. The planetary pollution generated is so consequent that it could lead to the next mass extinction, of which it would itself be a victim. Animal and plant species are confronted in nature with the destruction of their ecosystems by the activities of modern man. Global warming is endangering the natural balance between air, water, animals and plants. It is too late to turn back the clock, but far from too late to act and prevent it from getting worse. Human intelligence and technology are opening the doors to a possible future. Homo sapiens is now leading his evolution. He is able to change his way of life and to exploit the planet's resources in a rational and measured way. Because the Earth is far from having said its last word, the history of life on its surface is still going to know many evolutions.